Hello again, friends, and you are our friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here, wherever it is that you are on this beautiful spring day on the cusp of the month of May in the year 2021. I am your host, the great Brian Last, and I'll be asking your questions of this man, the star of the Drive Thru, Mr. Jim Cornette.
What in the French fried you-know-what was that Zager and Evans intro on the cusp of May in the year 2020, in the year 2525, if man is still alive, if woman can survive, we may find. What are you doing, Brian? Are you still high?
I am not still high. I'm trying to give...
Are you impaired?
For the people who are collectors...
These programs?
No, for the people who are collectors, sometimes you may want to know the date of the recording. Doing it for the collectors out there.
Well, what would this is audio. This is not even real. This is something that's transported about the interwebs by some unknown modern technology. They can listen to it, but they can't collect it. How are they going to put this podcast on their shelf or in their cabinet or in their collectibles unit?
It's a way to stamp this for history. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, because this could never happen. Later on today, there's some sort of incident in front of your house, and you start screaming at people on the street, and someone throws a rock and it hits you in the head, you go to the hospital. This would be a document of the last thing you did before that incident.
And then we could have Stephen P. New introduce it in court as proof that I didn't have the brain damage before, but
that's right.
But wait a minute. I'm not sure that Stephen P. New would introduce one of our programs into open court as evidence that neither one of us had brain damage. So there might be a flaw in that. Why are you wanting somebody to beat me in the head with a rock?
It's not that I want that. It's just I'm looking at the likely conclusions. I'm looking at the likely conclusions.
Well, there wasn't any rocks around because I've just had the yard cleaned up. Just had the yard cleaned up. The only thing in it was a fucking Ford Mustang. Oh, but anyway. I didn't want to get into this now, but this is your show, and I don't mean to presuppose to just run off with it and steer the topic of conversation, because you are the host here. I am merely the expert guest. But there is a companion piece to this, because, you know, I've mentioned on the experience at least, and I'm sure I mentioned it last week also, Bree at the post office was on vacation last week. Went down with her financier, to the Great Smoky Mountains down to Gatlinburg, had a wonderful time getting away from it all out in the mountains, had a cabin, possibly a bear on their deck at night. They couldn't see well enough, but there were footsteps. But anyway, so this was her this morning. See, I do more before podcast time than most people do all day, Brian. I've already been to the post office and shipped out another 75 packages to the waiting Cornette's Collectibles customers. The action figure update will come. But anyway, it's the first time I've seen her in a week. So I tell her the story of the white Ford Mustang that ended up on my fence. And besides laughing, she also has the wide eyes because let me tell you guess what happened to Bree this past weekend? The first day she gets back home to beautiful downtown Louisville, Kentucky, she and her boyfriend are in their vehicle, not sure what she's driving, and they're sitting ready to make a turn onto the interstate from the road that they're on, and he looks up in his rearview mirror and bam, he sees an accident behind them. A red Ford Mustang runs into somebody, and I was trying to, because, she's got a mask on and I got the mask on, and the post office was loud this morning. There was some grumbling about a package over in one of the other windows. So I'm trying to hear all the details, but point is, regardless of what the other car was and what happened to it, this red Ford Mustang plows into this guy, and the Mustang's airbags deploy, and the guy driving the Mustang gets out and his nose is bleeding because he'd just been hit in the fucking face. Every time I see those airbags, I'm thinking, how is this fucking safer? This goddamn giant fucking pneumatic explosive device bursts out of your steering wheel and bashes you in the fucking face. But nevertheless, that's what happened to this guy. He's got a bloody nose. So as they're sitting waiting to make this turn, he's looking and he's called her attention to it. And she looks around. The guy has gotten out of the Mustang and seen the other, whoever the fuck that was lost in the din of the other conversation, whether it was a man or a woman. And well, just then their light is turning. Well, they can't hold up, more traffic so they're turning get on the ramp to the interstate. And within about 10 seconds or less, he looks at me, he says to her, "Hey, look at this shit." Which is never a good thing you want to hear when you're getting on the interstate. Hey, look at this shit. The guy's back in the Mustang and he is fleeing the scene with his airbag deployed. He's driving up, he's pulled out, and he's turned left, not obviously stopping for the string of traffic. He's jumping in the line at the turn to get on the interstate, and he's coming up to the left-hand side of a ramp. You can visualize this, right? He's coming up to the left of the traffic on the emergency side of the ramp, and he's picking up speed. And they're like, what the fuck? So he says, call 911. And she's getting on the phone as this guy flies past them. They get the license number. And it shouldn't really be hard to track this fucking guy down anyway, because he's got an airbag deployed. And he's like missing half of the hood of his car is off. He's missing half of the front of his car. So this fucking guy's getting on the fucking interstate driving a half a car. And she gets the 911 and gives him the scoop. And just then this guy, jumps out through the traffic and he takes off going 100 miles an hour. Well, apparently, as well as her working at the post office, her boyfriend is some governmental person that they got a police scanner, and they turn the scanner gimmick on, and they're listening to this now. However I guess you know how to find things like that when you have police scanner. But anyway, this guy's already blown past them and gone, so they have to listen to it on the radio. But the resolution of this thing was the guy got off way down the interstate into a residential neighborhood. Who knows if he was trying to go home or what he was trying to do. But also, here's another thing. This was an older, I don't know what it is about these people driving his Mustangs, but this was an older Mustang. And Bree knows more about cars than I do, which you could take what I know about cars and shove them up shit stain's ass and you'd still have room for the car. But she said if the airbag deploys, maybe you know this. You're a man of the world, Brian. Does the power steering lock up? If the power steering disables if you're on some of the newer models, she says this is a thing.
I have no idea.
You have no, well, and you're completely useless for the purpose of this scenario. Hey, so we'll continue on.
I'm a man of the world.
So anyway, the point is this guy's gotten off in a residential neighborhood, but he's only driving half a car to begin with, and he's been going 100 miles an hour on the interstate, and who knows what condition his tires are in. And he apparently, in this neighborhood, loses control and wipes out about 8 or 10 mailboxes and comes to rest in a guy's front yard and proceeds to get in a fight with the guy, the homeowner, that he's come to rest in his front yard. And the guy beat him up. The homeowner beat him up and held him down until the cops got there and arrested him for his rampage, his crime spree. What is it about these people driving these Mustangs?
I didn't know this was a problem sweeping the nation, or at least
apparently
Jefferson County.
Well, in the last program, we talked about these drug-addicted bank robbers or bank-addicted drug robbers. Now it's these Mustang-addicted crash makers. I don't know. Anyway, we'd mentioned an action figure update. Let me go ahead and just shoehorn this. It is your show. But let me just get that in just to get it out of the way. We have started on the orders for individual figures. As I've mentioned before, if you ordered domestically a 2-pack of figures and nothing else, those are all in the mail, folks. And now we're over the next week, we will be concentrating on I'm using the royal we now. I will be concentrating on the single figures domestically, and a bunch of those already went out this morning. And then by next week, we're going to be working on the domestics of people who ordered figures and some other item of merchandise. And we're in an orderly fashion. We're working through all this, folks. So thank you for your pay. Everybody has been remarkably calm. Nobody has felt the need to get jumpy because there's no place else to get this stuff. So it's not like I'm sending anybody else's shit out in front of yours either, because we've been closed down now for fucking almost a month. But they're coming. But this is your program.
It is. You've said that a few times now.
Brian.
And we have questions.
Which way do you want to go? Yes, we have questions. Do we have questions?
We have many, many, many questions.
Well, before you ask any of them, I do have this one email. Because this is, it has to do with something we were talking about on The Experience this past week, which is my show. So I wanted to do a follow-up on this before I turn it over to you, because this is your show. Okay, you know, old Mark Carano got canned from his talent relations position for what has come to be known as the trash bag incident. But as we talked about it, and look it up, folks, The Experience from this past week. If you haven't already heard it, you can get the full conversation there. But I said, number one, they fired him and a bunch of other people, and this sounds like real good timing for changes they were going to make. Anyway. But otherwise, I didn't know anything about Mark Carano besides the interaction I had with him at the Hall of Fame in 2017. And I said, Jesus Christ, when I worked for them full time, I was never treated with such respect and fawningness and grovelingness and everything. I couldn't ask for anything that they would, are you okay? Do you need anything? Would you like a water? Whatever, right? But anyway, I did get an email, Brian, from there's going to be no names and no clues otherwise than this is a person who worked in the WWE that would have been around Mark Carano quite a bit. And we'll just leave it there. I listened to your podcast about Carano. He was a real piece of shit. I worked with him, redacted, and he would suck everybody's dick and talk shit. Real scumbag. He catered to you because you're you and he's a Mark, and Mark was in capitals. He wants so badly to be one of the boys, but he went about it the wrong way. Entitled, power-drunk piece of shit. You'd be hard-pressed to find any of the boys he dealt with who liked or had any respect for him.
Wow. I can't believe CM Punk was able to break away from his schedule to write that to you.
No, quit now. Do not start unfounded. That is not that person. Don't start any unfounded rumors. But this is a person whose opinion I would consider valid about most things. So that's just somebody else's opinion, some nameless opinion out there. Anyway, it's your program.
It's my program, and we have a lot of questions, of course, sent in to Twitter.
To many different places.
Via email, yeah. There's lots of ways. Some people even complain that they don't get their questions on the air. Maybe we're going to do a special at the end of the show. It could happen to you, where we will pick your question and tell you why it didn't make it on the air. Wait a minute. What?
I did. That's my action figure. Hashtag it can happen to you. When people get the action figures in the mail, they should take a picture of them and tweet it so that people know that it is actually happening.
Right.
Hashtag it can happen to you.
Hashtag. The main thing being hashtag. I didn't use the hashtag. I just said it could happen to you.
It can. You know what? It might happen to you here in a minute if you keep stealing my shit. Come up with your own shit. This is your show. You should determine the direction of it. Let me ask you this. Did you watch the Roddy Piper biography last night on 8?
You know what? I forgot to set the DVR for it. I really wanted to watch it. I got to find a way. There has to be another way to see it, but I have not had a chance, but I really want to. There's another way.
They're going to rerun these things 15 times a day. They've already... As a matter of fact...
I don't typically bump into A&E if I'm not tuned into A&E, so I have no idea what they do all day.
Oh, come on.
What, you watch a lot of A&E?
Well, they've got fine programming.
Like what?
Well, and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But besides that,
exactly.
But no, there are. Well, Biography for one. It's a valid show. It's a long running, highly popular show. They didn't just start up doing wrestling, but A&E's a fine network. They use their left and right turn indicators. But anyway, no, you were going to watch it. I know you were, and then you forgot because you got too many things going on. But they have taken over A&E Network practically, because the Austin biography from last week was run again from 6 to 8 Eastern, and then Piper from 8 to 10, and then the Treasure Show, and the Treasure Show was rerun from last week. And I did not watch the Treasure Show because I went to sleep. As a matter of fact, I had to watch the last 30 minutes of Roddy today because I was trying to stay. I would go to sleep on the last half hour. I'd wake up and it just finished, and I'd run it back on the DVR, and I'd start playing it, and I'd wake up again. I did that like 3 times, and finally I said, fuck it, I'll do it tomorrow. But that's because I'm old, and I had a big day of figure packing. Because Lord knows figures need to be packed.
You know, with that Treasure Show, I DVR'd the first one. I forgot to DVR also that one, but I'll find a way to catch it. One of the wrestling historians and wrestling collectors out there texted me after the first one, the Mick Foley episode. Apparently they went to some wrestling collector's house to get the memorabilia, and this well-known wrestling collector texted me, who the fuck is this guy? So I don't even know who these people are. Who
the fuck is this guy? And I love the New York grammar up there. No, well, they have found, because for their purposes of that program, wrestling collectors are people who collect modern WWE memorabilia. Whereas for purposes of older, more serious, more broad historians such as ourselves, who are you calling a broad? We consider people like the gentleman that you're speaking of a collector, because they have things of all the world of wrestling, the vintage items, modern things, different genres and countries and etc. And not just, fucking Billy Gunn's tube socks from the Attitude Era. So, you snob.
Yeah, well. Do you think they're setting up, is this series setting up a Hall of Fame? They're going around collecting all these things to put them in the warehouse? Like, that's not a good ending to the show. We want to buy this from you so we could just put it someplace that no one will ever see it.
Well, I did hear also from a couple people that a couple of the more serious collectors that they contacted. And the problem with that is that I know, and I won't out those people either, but I know a couple of different real serious collectors that they contacted that wouldn't sell their shit. See, the real serious, they don't want to sell their shit. And they were offering some stupid money for things that they wanted because it's a television show. It's the same thing as they don't really. Apparently now we've found out that Storage Wars is a work, and they don't really pay those thousands of dollars for that either. But
if you want to get more money out of the deal, just tell them that Tony Khan offered you something.
Yes, because he's going to set up the Bizarro World Wrestling Hall of Fame. But anyway, so we'll talk about the Treasure Show because I haven't watched that either. We'll talk about that this week if there was anything going on. But as far as the Roddy biography, I want to talk about it for a minute here today, and then you'll just have to catch up when you can, because I loved it except for one glaring thing. So I will say the things that I liked first, so we're more positive. Because Roddy was, even though I didn't get to see him live often before I got in the business when I was still a fan, he was one of my favorite wrestlers, and it really didn't even get to see him that long while I was still a fan before I got in the business, because the videotape era only started 79, 80-ish. And so we saw the tail end of Portland, then saw when he went to the Carolinas. But the promos and the fucking, he was different in every way. We talked about this. Well, God, it may have been now so long ago when he died, but he had a different way of working his body language and the way that he worked than everybody else. He always looked like he was in a fight. He even did the boxing stagger kind of thing. His intensity, where he wasn't a big guy with jacked up arms, but when he got on somebody in the ring, it was vicious, and he was into it, and you could see the facials. And I actually saw him legitimately get on somebody. And, when he would get on the top of you and he'd fire those quick rights, right? You know what I'm talking about. When he was getting heat on the fucking babyface.
Yeah, of course.
I saw him get heat on a Mark the exact same way in the Cincinnati Gardens in the fucking aisleway. And with the result that the Mark got carried out and his feet were twitching. But this guy took one swing at Piper and he hit him 3 times before he dropped. And then he was on him. Boom, 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 boom. He was different. And then you combine that with the promo and that whatever era he was in or whatever he was doing, whether you thought he was a complete lunatic or whether you thought he was a fucking charming baby face or whatever he was doing, the same thing as the Austin biography last week. You believed that guy. Even if you didn't believe the business, you believed that guy. And you're going to love this show because Gene LaBelle was in it. What is Gene LaBelle now? 87?
I was going to say he has to be close to 90, yeah.
And my God, he almost steals it as a personality, as you would imagine, because of, if you know anything about Gene LaBelle. But they got him. They got unprecedented access to his family, his daughters, Colt, his son, Kitty, his wife, and they had family home video and pictures and older stuff. So that was tremendous. And nobody can really tell the story of Roddy's troubled childhood because nobody really knows what the fuck it was. He would only, shade at it a few times every once in a while, and they couldn't even articulate, but he was just such a complicated guy. So the personal side was covered much better than last week's with Steve. The one, I'll go ahead and mention the one glaring thing now. It's you're going to go crazy because of being the wrestling historian and purist, and you're even more anal about these things than I am. I'm willing to let some things slide because either chronologically or whatever, because how do you tell these things in a short video format? But you are led to believe from the way that they edited this, at least, that Roddy left Portland and went straight to do color commentary on Atlanta TV.
It's not surprising that they would screw it up.
But I know, and Bruce Pritchard's going to take a lot of heat because the way they edited it, I know he knows better than this, but the way they edited it sounds like that he was saying that. But so then after they had covered him being a color guy on Atlanta TV, then they started showing him and Flair, and they started showing Mid-Atlantic Wrestling highlights and Crockett highlights and the dog collar match with Valentine and etc. Never mentioned Jim Crockett's name or Jim Crockett Promotions once. It was like they conflated that Atlanta and then that footage would be the same place, when in actuality, obviously, it wasn't until Crockett bought Atlanta fucking 3 or 4 years later. So, but that was so jarring because all of a sudden I'm waiting. There's some great footage from Los Angeles that you wouldn't think would be around. Somebody had an early VHS machine, and Gene LaBelle and et cetera covered Los Angeles and Portland. There was some good footage from Portland, and then all of a sudden he's on Atlanta TV. I'm like, what the fuck? Where did the Carolinas go? Because that was, I don't even have the record book in front of me, but he had to debut for Crockett sometime in 1980.
1980.
Okay, but
I think he was there from 80 to 83 with a small window where he claims he was blackballed.
Well, I think the small window at one time was where I always heard that he told guys in the business he just wanted to go down to Pensacola, make $1,000 a week where he could do all the shit he wanted to do. But, so the point is, he comes to Jim Crockett Promotions in 1980, and with all respect to Portland and Los Angeles, because when he was in Los Angeles, it was the, somewhat final days of LaBelle. All of a sudden, he's with Flair and Wahoo and Steamboat and the best NWA talent in the best NWA territory, and he's blowing past everybody, because that's when we first started. When Crockett got TV on in Cincinnati, you could on Channel 5, I think it was noon. Now, it couldn't have been noon. That would have been opposite Jarrett's show. But anyway, it was either 11 o'clock or maybe it was noon on Sunday, whatever the fuck. Even with my high-powered antenna, noon in the middle of the day, you could only get fucking very snowy pictures and a little rough audio on Channel 5 from Cincinnati. And I would sit there through the whole thing hoping that Piper was going to do a local promo. It wasn't even recordable, but I would want to listen to hear him fucking talk. And, you know, that was where he really, you know, became, and what would you think? Obviously, more people then saw, starting in 84, the stuff in the WWF and the MTV stuff and WrestleMania, etc. But if you're a wrestling fan and you want to collect the best Roddy Piper interviews and the best in-ring matches, it's his period of time in Mid-Atlantic for Crockett, right?
Certainly in-ring, I think. I mean, you can't say anything. Well, his run in Portland was great. And him and Playboy Buddy Rose really defined that era for so many people.
And the promos, he had even more leeway in Portland than he did for Crockett. But just interacting with the talent that he interacted with in Crockett. And you remember, even before they went out to the arenas, when they got the Nemo truck, when they were still doing the studio show at WRAL in Raleigh or whatever, and he's down in, they showed a clip of this, he's down in front of the goddamn desk, Bob Caudle's freaking out and fucking Piper's screaming, and he's got the belt, and he blew everybody, even sometimes Flair, off the screen in Mid-Atlantic wrestling when everybody was the best that they could be.
Well, that was one of the things. Flair, already in 79, early 1980, was considered by many future world champion, one of the best promos in the business, one of the best in-ring guys in the business. And all of a sudden you drop Piper in there and he's out talking everyone. And that got him over. You have him and Flair, the two best talkers in the business, going at it back and forth, and it worked.
And then also, he was just so different. They'd seen every other kind of everybody. They'd seen Snuka. They'd seen Orndorff. They'd seen every style of wrestler, but Piper, as I said before, didn't work like anybody else. And I'm sure he took things from people. I think he took more ideas than moves, or more ideas than ways of doing things. It seemed like everything he did in the ring and every way that he worked, the way he moved, it was always him. But I can't think of anybody he copied or anybody that's really ever got being him down. They copy everybody else. Who has worked like Roddy Piper since Piper got big 35 years ago?
Not too many. I mean, it used to drive me crazy when Moxley was Dean Ambrose and he first came up to the main roster and people said, oh, he reminds me of Roddy Piper. He reminds me of Terry Funk. And big, why? Because he looks like he hasn't showered? Why?
Hey, on behalf of Terry and Roddy, I take exception to that. They took regular showers. Sometimes it just didn't look like it. But anyway, so in the biography special, besides skipping over that, and then they obviously went into heavy detail on the WWF run, beginning with WrestleMania, etc. And obviously, that story has been told, and I think that's what we're gonna see from these shows. Is Austin was easy because Dallas, and they've really skipped over USWA, but Dallas to WCW, to WWF, to Global Icon. For a guy like Roddy that went to multiple territories and it goes farther back in time, and, these shows are never too much about listening to exact historians who will point out their, flaws. If they get to somebody, who else is on the list? We had that last week, but point is,
off the top of my head, there's Randy Savage, Booker T.
I wonder how much footage of ICW television they're going to have for Savage. I've probably got more ICW TV on tape than anybody except, well, maybe Angelo Poffo had it when but it's going to be more frustrating for wrestling historians who actually know how these stars emerged when it gets farther back and they have less tape and they decide to start skipping over shit.
And they have Brett and Shawn, so let's see how they're going to play up Montreal on this thing.
Oh, Lord.
Ultimate Warrior. That could be interesting. Mick Foley.
I wonder, there's not a lot of footage of Warrior or Sting in Memphis. When they did a DVD on Sting in TNA, Jeff Jarrett asked me to find 5 weeks that Warrior and Sting were in Memphis and copy it. And I think I found most of it and copied it for him. That was 15 years ago. And I don't know where I put the VHSs back on the shelf, but if they do Warrior, they're probably going to start out with, would you show that? Would you show, if you're doing a biography on somebody that was a big major wrestling star, would you show any of that Memphis stuff where it was so bad the people in the studio audience were laughing at them? Or would you just kind of gloss over that?
If you're going to tell the story, you have to show it. But I kind of think for the Warrior, between that stuff and some of his off-color remarks, maybe you should just make it a kayfabe biography. Like he landed on the planet 2 million years ago. Just tell some fantastical story like he did in his promos.
But and back to the Roddy bio, the last part of it's really sad, and it was sad to watch Kitty talk about, everything. Do you remember right before he died, he did an interview, and I'm trying to think what the host show it was. The logo was on there, but I can't remember what show it was. It may have been on ESPN or something, but it got clips of it got sent around at the time because he obviously just couldn't keep a train of thought. He couldn't make a complete sentence, and everybody's like, oh, what's going on with Roddy? And that was, they were going to take him to the doctor to see what had caused that the morning or the day after he passed away that night in bed at home. And she talked about that, which even then, as much as he was traveling, there was a possibility that could have happened not at home, and she was glad that it did. And that's, on an unrelated note, why you ain't going to see me in too many hotels from now on for the rest of my fucking life. But that was sad, and I was thinking, my God, when you hear somebody not making sense in the wrestling business, you think of other things. But I had been talking to Roddy. I talked to Roddy more the last 6 months of his life than I ever had in my life. After all that time of being a fan of his, he was another guy. We barely ever worked in the same place. I got to get knocked out by him at WrestleMania 10 that time when he was the special referee. And, we had done the promo I got to do in Louisville that I've talked about on the WWF pay-per-view. But we didn't get to work together very much or even in the same place a lot. But he had started doing a podcast, and I hate this was, 6 or 7 years ago, because now with podcasts, Roddy would be phenomenal. It was still an emerging thing back then. But he had started doing a podcast, and I'd done 2 or 3 spots on it. And he had just asked, the last one I did, I'll tell you a story about his co-host in a minute, but he had asked, hey, you want to do something once a month? Yes, Roddy Piper asked me to be on his show once a month. Of course I will do that. Yes. And that's the last time I ever talked to him. But the first time I did his show, and the guy's name is Earl Skakel, or Earl if you're out there. But you know how Roddy sometimes he had that way of speaking. He'd slur a word every now and then, and we weren't doing this on Skype then. I was on my fucking phone. He'd just call me on the phone right here at the house. So he had introduced his co-host to me as Earl Skakel, and I thought he said he's Canadian. So later on in the program, Earl said something trying to be funny or whatever, and it kind of fell flat. And I said, well, Roddy, don't blame him. He's a Canadian. And Roddy said, what? I said, I thought you said he was a Canadian. He said, and Roddy said, no, I said he's a comedian. I said, oh, well, as a fucking comedian, he makes a good Canadian. And for whatever reason, that tickled him, and he started calling his co-host a Canadian instead of a comedian. I don't know, but that was funny to us at the time, but because Roddy was involved. It's not funny if Roddy's not involved.
And Roddy's Canadian.
And Roddy's, that's why he thought it was funny. Yeah, I don't, anyway. See, Roddy would have made that all brilliant. But they're obviously doing these shows, all of them, for the wrestling fans, obviously, for the ratings and etc. So it's heavily, but it's not, like I said, it's not the wrestling fans like you and me that know every fact and figure. It's the wrestling fans that used to watch these people on their television. So all of those people are going to enjoy these shows immensely, and you see shit you haven't seen before because they've got access to the family or whatever. But there's going to be, just the bigger the star, the more glaring the bios. But skipping Crockett for Piper is like skipping the Nazis and Bruno's mother for Bruno. That's a big deal.
If that was the only problem, I'm surprised. It's a WWE documentary. I know that A&E, I can tell you that I heard from people at A&E, they were frustrated with working with WWE because they always want to have control over everything.
Oh, now the one thing that they did do is, remember when Roddy cut the promo on HBO or whatever it was about, all my friends are, Real Sports, all my friends are dying and the company, they don't care. Well, they made sure to put in right after that they apologized and made up, and he was in the Hall of Fame a year later.
Oh, not that they immediately fired him and he was taken off TV?
Vince said, well, you just got to say, we got to part ways, pal. Vince on these looks like he's melting somehow.
There was... He hated cigarettes, yet he sounds like the smoker now.
Well, it's because he's been doing that fucking gimmick voice all those years. But the opening got some cringes from some people because Vince is apparently sitting there waiting to do the take, and he has his cell phone. He said, hey, Roddy, how you doing, pal? What? It must be hot down there.
Oh God. Come on.
Because he thinks he's being funny, right? But okay, I love you too, or whatever. Hey, you're saving a place for me? Not too soon, pal. Okay, bye. It's Roddy. He's not really in hell.
What?
He said Roddy's not really in hell.
He's doing bits now and Biography?
He was doing a bit for the fucking producers, and they aired it.
He's become like the old man who wants to make a quarter disappear. Watch this. You can't find it. It's behind your ear.
I know how he could do it. He could hide a stack of them up Triple H's nose. All right, but this is your show.
It is my show. I did want to ask you on the topic of A&E's Biography. So A&E now has Biography and WWF's Hidden Secret Treasures that we know about, or whatever the name of the show is.
Yeah, that's the thing again. The premise is we got to recover and rediscover these lost treasures. So let's call the guy up that's got it and go buy it from him.
So those two shows are on A&E. TNT, they have AEW Dynamite. There's supposed to be a second AEW show starting at some point soon. And then I'm going to classify the Cody and Brandy Rhodes reality super show as being part of the wrestling content. USA Network, 2 WWE shows, right? And then they have the Miz and Mrs. And then you have the WWE on Fox. And then,
do they know which is which, by the way?
And then on Vice, Dark Side of the Ring. Now,
and by the way, let's not let the opportunity go by to remind everybody that if you've been longingly aching to see my smiling face on television again, your chance starts on May the 6th with the season 3 debut of Dark Side of the Ring. 2 hours on Brian Pillman. I'll be featured on that program, and we're going to have Evan and Jason, the creators and behind the scenes major domos of Dark Side, on the Experience this week. But yes, Dark Side, and they're replaying the previous seasons on a liberal basis on Vice, as well as the new season that starts on May the 6th, and that'll be a set of 7 episodes. I think that'll be the first half of the season, and then they're going to take a break and do the second half.
Well, as I was saying, Vice has that show, and now a limited run with MLW showing their archives.
I forgot about that. Yes, instead of Vice, it should be Vice Lock.
So you're seeing a lot of interesting things where networks that weren't traditionally in wrestling are now getting in wrestling and wrestling-themed content. And as much as a wrestling TV show doesn't do what it used to do, and you look at the numbers and you dissect it, it's interesting so many of these other shows about the culture of wrestling, the subculture of wrestling, the ecosystem of wrestling are getting picked up and put out there on TV now. What do you think that says?
Sometimes even the skeletal system of wrestling. The first thing it says to me is, in Jerry Lawler's immortal words, where were you motherfuckers when I ran this town every week? We had television shows about wrestling shows that 5 times as many people watched as are watching now, whether it be on cable or on broadcast. And the stations wanted us to pay to put them on. And now there's literally a 1/5 of the number of people watching these programs as there used to be, and they're paying everybody to fucking air them. What has happened? What has happened? And secondly, and the second part of your question is, I'm not at all surprised that the shows about the culture of or the behind the scenes of wrestling are flourishing as much, if not more, than the wrestling programs, because that's the only goddamn interesting thing about wrestling these days, and at least people know or believe that is somewhat real and legitimate.
You know, A&E for the Biography series with WWE, they're getting $20,000 a spot, which is pretty good, I would think, for a smaller size cable station like that.
I would think so.
Vice, not so much. You can go to Vice and get some spots, but A&E, $20,000 a spot. Well, Jim, let's get some questions here.
Were you thinking of advertising our program over there?
I wasn't thinking.
You got the quote?
I wasn't thinking of that, but someone who I know has talked to the network relayed back to me some of the prices, and I said, my God, it's cheaper than this show. What the hell are they doing over there? But anyway.
A stooge report. You got a stooge report.
I wouldn't say that. I got a report about what was actually transpiring and taking place.
That's the same kind as Grizzly Smith used to give. So a stooge report.
Well, let's not compare me to that dirty bastard, but Jim.
No, you would be the one getting the report. He would be the one giving the report.
Okay, well, I still want nothing to do with him. But on that topic, Jim, I can't think of any way to transition to one of our sponsors here. So I guess I'll be going to our first question.
You know, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, tell me, please.
If you would like to have a good night's sleep, and forget the experience of having listened to this program, then I can think of no way that you will sleep finer than on a Helix sleep mattress. Like you're floating on a cloud, like you're curled up in the belly of a warm puppy, a warm, loving puppy with soft fur. You will sleep and dream of butterflies and rainbows on the Helix sleep mattress. That's exactly how pleasant it is, because what you do is you pick out the mattress that you want, not somebody else's mattress. They're not going to send you a mattress that somebody else wants to sleep on or has slept on in the past. No, you get one tailored for you and brand new. You go at Helix Sleep, I should say, HELIX, helixsleep.com, and you take a quiz that takes about 2 minutes, and you talk about your sleep preferences, the positions, your body type, blah, 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 and then they pick for you the mattresses that most fit your requirements. They've got soft, medium, firm, cool-down mattresses, plus-size mattresses, not mattresses that are bigger, but mattresses that are for bigger people. I didn't even know they made those. Anyway, they match you up with the model mattress that you match up with, and then you order the thing, and if you go to helixsleep.com/JCE, Helix is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners while you're ordering that mattress. helixsleep.com/JCE, and then when it's delivered, you get to open it up and watch it unfold in front of your very eyes, which is part of the entertainment. Because it does, there's not going to be 6 people carrying this thing and they can't even get it in the door. It comes in a box and you can set it where you want it to go, open it up. It's not like an I Love Lucy life raft. It will slowly go until it's fully formed. It's a marvel of engineering. HelixSleep.com/JCE to sleep on a model of engineering.
Well, Jim, let's get some questions in here. And
it's your show. Go ahead.
A very popular topic that has been sent in by many people over the last few days. I'll ask one for everyone. This was sent by Graham Schweikert in Chesterton, Indiana. I had to pick this one of all the ones from all these people. But anyway.
You couldn't pick John Jones from Smithville.
From Graham Schweikert, excuse me, in Chesterton, Indiana.
Yeah, or is it Graham Chester in Schweikerton? Okay, we're back, folks. We took a brief moment to compose ourselves. You'll never know about it through the miracle of editing because we realized in the middle of our frivolousness that this was going to be a serious question, and we had to somewhat compose ourselves so that we could give this some measure of the respect that it deserves. How about that?
That sounded pretty good. And again, this question from Graham Schweikert in Chesterton, Indiana.
Stop. We're going to call this Questioner X.
Questioner
X from somewhere asked the following.
Hi, Jim. I was wondering your thoughts on the news lately regarding Steve Mongo McMichael and his recent diagnosis with ALS. Any stories and or memories would be appreciated.
You know, actually, the sad thing is, I don't remember ever even meeting Steve McMichael. I'm trying to think of any fan fest that he would have. Did he ever even do fan fest or one that I was at? I don't recall. I'd hate for somebody to say, oh, well, he was there at such and such, but I really legitimately don't remember that I ever met him. He only wrestled for WCW at a time where I was obviously working for the competition. I mean, he's taken a lot of heat for his less than graceful wrestling style, and that was a whole Twitter thing for a while there. But to get over like he did with Ric Flair, you got to be, as Mama Cornette used to say, one heck of a character. Flair loves him, and that's probably honestly why he became a horseman, because his name value. He was a all-star football player, and so, Flair, that's the kind of guy that would have been in the Horsemen. And if he'd have come along in the time of the Horsemen in the Crockett days, maybe they would have had time to polish him up a little bit more. But he seems like he's taken it with a sense of humor. And, every time he always was a heck of a personality. And you could see that personality-wise, he kind of fit in wrestling, even if he wasn't the smoothest in the ring. So, I hate to hear that, because for all accounts, he's a heck of a guy, but I don't know that much about ALS. I mean, Lou Gehrig's disease, but Lou Gehrig was a baseball player. Is this a neurological thing? Is it related to football or concussions, or just something that can strike and you don't really know until it's over?
Well, it could be. I think he said in one of the video interviews I saw that, he's well past his career. He's in his 60s, I think.
Yeah.
Lou Gehrig was in the middle of his career. He was in his 30s when it happened, so it's hard to predict. Lou Gehrig did have a lot of concussions, they say, from playing football in college.
I did not know that.
But, we really don't know where it would have stemmed from with Steve McMichael.
But, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, once again, at a time like this, you hate to criticize his in-ring performance, but at the same time, he was an athlete that came from another sport that respected the business, and he wasn't out there doing anything foolish. He was trying to do all that stuff that he saw everybody else doing. So, I don't recall anything that would be anything he ever said or did that would be disrespectful of or, knocking the business. Do you?
No, it seemed like he took it really seriously. And
Yeah.
you brought up him fitting in with the Horsemen. I think a lot of people look at the Four Horsemen at their peak and say, oh my God, Flair, Tully, Arn, Barry, best in-ring workers in the business, with apologies to the Midnight Express. Mongo didn't fit in with that, but the other criteria to be a Horseman is to be able to party with Flair all night. And he could hang with anyone with that.
And actually the promos and just being a over-the-top personality, that was Horseman-like. It's just that, but that was the era where they were taking some of those guys and just, whether they be pro football players or Mark Henry was, an Olympic athlete. So the very first match he ever has is on worldwide pay-per-view. It wasn't fair to a lot of those guys. They might have been, a little bit better had they had training. But then again, in McMichael's case, he had already had his football career and was getting probably a little old to start learning something else from scratch.
He did commentary, if you remember, before the Lawrence Taylor match at WrestleMania 11. Mongo did commentary on Raw, and then like all the two sides, the DiBiase, Bigelow side and the Lawrence Taylor side all got into a fight. But he was really good. That's why when they announced him for Nitro, before anyone heard it, people were saying, oh, this could be interesting. He was good on Raw.
I had completely forgotten that he was on Raw. So there you have it. You have an amazing grasp of facts and trivia.
He introduced Deborah McMichael into the business.
Hey, we're going to keep this positive about Steve, okay?
Okay.
No, but we wish him the best.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Robert. On a recent interview, the Maestro said he was Smoky Mountain Wrestling's lawman and policed the locker room. He even beat up an Ultimate Warrior wannabe. Is this true?
Well, let me say that the Maestro, the Stro, wrestled for Smoky Mountain Wrestling as Robbie Eagles. And he's from North Carolina, and he was a heck of an amateur wrestler, and he was a nice guy. And as I recall, his father was real supportive of his career and used to come over to some of the TV tapings and et cetera with him. As a matter of fact, some of the fans cut 2 of my tires one night, and I was going to be stuck on the side of a mountain, me and Brian Hildebrand. But Robbie and his dad came along and were able to carry us down the mountain. I don't I'm trying to remember there. You know what? Now that he said that, no, actually, he wasn't like the Smoky Mountain Wrestling policeman. I don't want to call Robbie a liar or an extrapolator because I haven't heard his comments or whatever. Maybe they just came off that way that he was doing that in this instance, but there was no job opening there. Okay, I need one of you guys to be the locker room policeman. And to be honest, this is almost 30 years ago. At that point in time, there was other people in the locker room that might have been a policeman rather than Robbie Eagles, just by virtue of their seniority in the business. Bob Armstrong, anybody. But I'm trying to think now that there's some Ultimate Warrior looking fucker, some local guy at some TV taping with his face painted and a bunch of tassels may possibly have popped off to Robbie or someone else. But that's all I can remember.
That wasn't an uncommon thing in that era. Someone showing up looking like the Ultimate Warrior wanted to be a wrestler.
Well, it was uncommon at Smoky Mountain shows because usually I had seen whoever I booked and that wouldn't happen. But it may have been a case that somebody said, hey, I got a local guy that can come or blah, 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 or whatever. But I don't remember any big issue. But I probably wasn't even there. I was probably in the production meeting or shooting promos. But I will say a bunch of good things about Robbie in general. He was a great guy and a pleasure to have around.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Richard Collins in Sydney, Australia. recently released wrestler Chelsea Green has posted a selfie in front of Vince McMahon's office with a piece of paper that appears to include things banned from the room. Have you seen this image, Jim?
No, I have not. Please tell me, what is this seriously a thing?
Apparently so. It's an oldish graphic, if we're assuming this is real. It's Chelsea Green pulling down her face mask, standing in front of it. It says Vince's office, and there is a picture of a cigarette with one of those, what do you call them? The Ghostbusters sash. Cigarettes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
There's also a cup of coffee and a pencil. Although those aren't crossed out, I think people are assuming that pencils and coffee are banned from the room as well.
Well, see, now that doesn't make sense, because one of the things that you're supposed to have in your briefcase, along with your booking book, you specifically have Vince's secretary, Beth, order from the place that everybody gets their booking books from. You're also supposed to have a box of sharpened number 2 pencils, the kind that erase easy, along. Believe me, I'm not bullshitting you here. They had a special kind of pencil that you would get so it erased real easy, because you did that a lot, and you're supposed to have those with. So, and I'm trying to think. I don't know if Vince has a thing for or against coffee. I'm trying to remember if I always saw him drinking bottled water, but I don't remember any major coffee aversion. What else is on there, Brian?
That was it. That's it? It's just the cigarettes crossed out, and then a cup of coffee and a pencil. We've already heard rumors that he hates mirrors and talking cars as well.
I figured there'd be this whole long list of things you're not supposed to bring in, probably like pigs. After the hog pen match, and Owen led the pig wrangler into putting the pigs in Vince's office, they probably banned pigs. And I don't know. Again, the last time I was around was the Hall of Fame deal, and I was in Vince's office at that arena, the Amway Center in Orlando. We've mentioned it's not like he has a traveling office. They give Vince an office and a room that he has all of his amenities in and can do what he wants to do in. And so I was in it, and there were the normal signs outside, catering this way and production that way and pre-tapes that way or whatever, but I didn't see any written instructions on what to do or not do when you went into Vince's office. I don't know what's going on around there these days.
There's another interview that's been going around, and I don't think it's a new story, but I believe it's a Stephanie interview where she talks about how or why her father hates nodding. Was that a thing?
I've seen that. Nobody ever said that. I've never been a nodder, right? Except, if I'm telling my own story, I might be nodding, right? Whatever, but I'm not just going to sit there and nod my head up and down. I'm listening to him, right? So I was never cautioned against it because I didn't really do it. But again, it's not like something that was shared around with everybody. Don't nod. Whatever you do, don't nod. Definitely, he's always been, he would blister Pat Patterson or Jim Ross or anybody. He doesn't want to be around smoking. And he's always had the quirks that we've talked about with the fact that he just eats just because you have to. and he attacks the food, and he does the thing with the shaver where he shaves constantly. And he doesn't sneeze or recognize sickness. Even if you're literally fucking flatlining in front of him, he will not be the first one to suggest you go home early from the office or whatever. But a lot of the weird stuff that they're talking about, that apparently there seems to be some evidence of, including things that Stephanie says or the pictures or whatever, there's more things coming up that's a picadillo to Vince than I experienced when I was around him.
This could be good the next few years. A diminished capacity Vince with Bruce and Johnny Ace on either side versus Stephanie and Triple H in a battle over who wins Nick Khan's heart. Could be interesting.
I'll tell you what, if they make a movie about that, I can hear one of our artists here on the drive-thru doing the theme song.
Jim, this next question sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from, everyone's got a name today, from Finnegan Courtney.
From Finnegan Courtney? Is Finnegan in again?
I guess he's in. Finnegan wants to know, can we please get Jim's thoughts on Kenny Omega becoming the AEW, AAA, and Impact World Champion?
Why? Why would you want my thoughts on it? Finnegan, what have I ever done to you? Is anybody taking this like this is a big deal? Like he's the Impact champ, like suddenly his stock has risen, his profile is raised, he's the Impact champion in this day and age at this point in time. It's just, the only thing I can't figure out is how that Callis has sold Tony Khan. Well, maybe now that I think about it and I mention those two names in that way, I can figure it out. Callis has sold Tony Khan on using his national TV show to prop up that zombie promotion. Otherwise, I'm mystified why that in any way they would be promoting Impact Wrestling, but otherwise than that, some people are acting like that this is the NWA World Championship from the day, or the somebody in the WWF in 1998 won the WCW Championship also, or it's not a major world title. Go down the list. I don't even know who they are, but I'm pretty sure if you compiled a list of the last 20 Impact World Champions, we would not have a who's who of the next season of A&E's Biography. So
I'm pulling up a list right now.
Is there a list out there? Is it a list of people in the Federal Witness Protection Program?
I will let you know shortly.
But even if goddamn Carl Gotch was on that list, Impact is less of a major world championship than Ring of Honor, because at least Ring of Honor has more television outlets in more places that more people are going to be seeing at some point or another than what are they doing? 150,000 views? We do fucking YouTube audio clips that do that. So I'm there's not really any major world championships in this country anymore besides the multiple ones done are in WWE, and if you want to consider the AEW title by default as the number 2 promotion, a major world title, what other world championships in wrestling in North America can what's the situation in Mexico? He's the AAA champion,
mega champion, I believe.
Is that the world champion, or do they have umpteen champions?
I don't know. How
many champions do they have? How's their business these days? Is it like, before pandemic, for fuck's sake? There's no Canadian world champion, so I guess he's got a couple of secondary belts from North America.
You think they're going to work out a deal with Billy Corgan to get Nick Aldis to drop the NWA title to him?
Well, at least it'd have been a better match. Aldis could probably do a little something with him. Did you see? I just saw the 2 main highlights of this incredible championship contest where he won the Impact title. Of course, courtesy of AEW Botches, by the way, on Twitter, folks. Follow them, because Tony Khan's trying to get him shut down because this guy's hitting a real nerve. But at AEW Botches, there was 2 spots where Twinkle Toes and Rich Swann were standing up on the top rope, and this was a GIF, but it was played in real time, standing up on the top rope, trying to hold each other up and hold each other together and jockeying for position until they could figure out what they were going to do, and then they just botched it the fuck up like a monkey fucking a football and fucking fell in a heap. Both times. In this classic confrontation that rivals Flair and Steamboat in terms of its thrillingness. So, no. Harpo McFingerbang went to an outlaw promotion and won a fucking belt that I'm sure you're about to read the names of some of the luminaries that have held in the past, and a small amount of people saw it on Access Television, and who gives two flying shits?
Here are some recent champions. I'll go in reverse order.
Okay.
Kenny Omega, obviously the current Impact World Champion. Rich Swann. Eric Young. Eddie Edwards.
I like Eddie. It's a shame to see him still keeping that company.
The title was vacated because of issues with the previous champion. Tessa Blanchard. Sami Callihan.
Wait, oh, that's right. She actually won the men's world championship in Impact.
Correct.
And beat the Warthog for it because they put it on Callahan first and then figured, well, fuck, people will believe a girl beating him up and then put their men's world championship on a woman. This is the prestigious major world title that Twinkle Toes has just added to his repertoire.
Brian Cage, Johnny Impact, Austin Aries, Pentagon Jr., Austin Aries again, Eli Drake, Alberto El Patron.
Oh, you're back to 2017 now. That's when I had to go down there and fire him on the air.
Yeah, this is when it was still the unified GFW World Heavyweight Champion.
Yeah. Actually, I fired Bruce Pritchard on the air, and then I buried Alberto Del Rio when they'd already kicked him out the door. I'm sorry, I need to clarify that.
And those are the most recent Impact champions.
So there was a time, maybe 30 years ago, where there were some major world championships around the world and Vader did a wonderful job of assimilating about 4 or 5 of them at one point. But I mean, right now to me, you have a hard time calling any WWE championship major because in that same company, they've got 3 men's singles champions, 3 women's singles champions, 3 sets of men's tag team champions, and at least 2, maybe 3 sets of women's tag team champions, plus U.S. champion, intercontinental champion. I'm sure that there's a cruiserweight title somewhere on a program that we don't even attempt to watch. So it's the major titles aren't major at this point.
Well, Jim, one thing I know about Kenny Omega is he's right now riding a good wave in his career. And we saw that picture that him and Don Callis had, I don't know what you want to call it, the beefcake photo, a beautiful painting. And maybe he wants a new painting, one with him and the many titles he has, and even some titles that he wishes he had.
Well, I'll tell you what, that would be the best thing for him to do is to just go right now to the folks at Paint Your Life. At paintyourlife.com, folks, you can get a hand-painted professional portrait created from any photograph or combination of photographs. You can choose from a team of world-class artists. You can work with them on the details. And then you can get a hand-painted portrait in about 3 weeks, whether it's yourself, your kids, your family, a special place, a cherished pet. You can combine pictures and generations of family, or if you're like Twinkle Toes and Don Callis, and you just like pictures of yourselves with completely exaggerated physiques to hang over the mantle, whatever you want, the folks at Paint Your Life can do it. And if you go right now and text DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E, to 64,000. That's DRIVE to 64 and 3 zeros, DRIVE to 64,000. Then you will get 20% off and free shipping on your painting. And at paintyourlife.com, there's no risk. If you don't love the final painting, your money is refunded, guaranteed. So 20% off and free shipping by texting DRIVE to 64,000. And go to paintyourlife.com to check out these amazing portraits right now, because after all, we're all aging. We're getting older. I remember when Don Callis used to have a full head of long hair, and now he's got a small tuft of Kenny's pubic hair on his head. So you want to capture these moments and keep them. And you want to paint your life is what you want to do. Anyway, so go do that now. Terms apply. Available at paintyourlife.com/terms.
That's right.
a tuft of Olivier's pubic hair, now where that beautiful crown of black hair used to sit on Callus's head.
All right, well, let's get going before you once again start talking about the scent of someone's minge. Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Josh in Ottawa, Canada. What was worse to live through? Booking meetings with Jim Herd or Vince Russo?
Oh, God. Well, Russo definitely. And here's why. It's not like that Russo's ideas were necessarily any worse than Herd's. That was my first booking spot. I'm sitting in the room with Ric Flair and Kevin Sullivan and Jim Ross. I'm happy to be there. It's just the one guy that is preventing all of us from doing anything. But I was still happy to be there until finally, then once Flair quit, and as I said, and then, then the whole thing, I just said, fuck it, this is ridiculous. With Russo, not only did you have to sit there and listen to him prattle on, but unfortunately in that environment, whereas everybody in the room with Herd had known that he was a complete idiot, it was only 50-50 as to who would come out and say it out loud. Not everybody in the room realized that Shitstain was a complete moron. And they were listening to him and humoring him. And whether it was people that would come from the office or in some cases, well, Bruce knew, but he wasn't going to say anything out loud. So, and plus I was older and crankier. And I was living in Connecticut to begin with and driving to Vince's house, as I mentioned, 2 hours every day in that ridiculous traffic. So I was already in a bad mood when I got there, in a bad mood that I was existing in to begin with, and I was older and crankier and less likely to suffer fools because this was not my... I can actually say at the time that Flair first asked me, that would have been my dream job, being on the WCW booking committee if you remove Jim Herd out of the equation. It was not my dream job to be on the WWF booking committee or creative committee or whatever they were calling it in those days. It was what I was doing to make some money back to fucking make sure I got the Smoky Mountain tapes paid for and then figure out an exit strategy. So I was way not really motivated to put up with that son of a bitch.
How do you think Russo would have worked under Jim Herd?
Oh my God. We wouldn't be doing this show right now. Professional wrestling would have ended like roller derby 20 years ago. Because they would have probably gotten along really fucking fabulous.
You think so?
Because Shitstain would have told Herd, yeah, all these wrestling people, they don't know what they're doing. They're irresponsible. They don't know anything. This is the modern times. It needs to be television. I've got a degree in writing. And Herd would have bought that. And the only thing is, since Russo don't drink, it would have been hard for him to have taken Herd out and get him sloshed, which is what Jim Ross's major way of dealing with the fucking idiot was. Because Ross was in the office all day, more often than we were, and he wasn't on the road as much, and he lived there in Atlanta, so they'd go out and have drinks, and that way Herd could tolerate JR, because JR,
was as drunk as he was.
Well, no, come on now. No, I don't see any way in the world as possible that I still think that Jim Herd had some kind of alcohol problem because nobody's face gets that red normally when they're not even mad. But, so yeah. So JR would go out and treat him nice and buy him a fucking drink, the old alcoholic, piece of shit, motherfucker. He's still alive. All the decent human beings in the world, and Jim Herd's still alive. But none of the rest of us wanted to suffer his fucking bullshit. But Russo would have sucked up to him, told him all the wrestling people were the problem, need to get with the modern times, and they would have finished up where WCW's last executive vice president would have been Jim Herd. They would have fucking ended the whole company probably in 2 years.
Well, Jim, our next question, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com. It's one of those questions I mentioned at the top. It could happen to you.
It could happen to me.
Jim, a lot of questions are sent in and then people get mad. You may see some feedback. Brian never asks my question. I've been sending it in for years. It never gets on the air. There are various reasons why questions don't get on the air, but right now we're going to go through just some random questions, and we'll see why these haven't gotten on the air so far.
Okay, well, we'll just, as we hear them, then we will evaluate whether or not that we should put them on the show or not.
Now, I remind everyone, and I remind you, we have a lot of new listeners. A lot of people discover the show each and every week, and they dive in, so they may not know your entire history. A lot of people are just discovering you, let alone the show. So
I have been shocked by that. I thought as long as I've been around that pretty much everybody had come to find me by now, but I still hear this.
Well, this question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jeff in Michigan. I recently learned that Jeff Jarrett's grandmother was a wrestling promoter starting in the late 1940s. Being the historian that you are, Jim, I was wondering if you had any stories about Christine Jarrett.
Well, how many of the clips on YouTube, on our award-winning YouTube channel, do you think involve Christine Jarrett at this point? How many hundreds would...
I don't know. And actually, I don't know if you've ever actually just explained her story, how she became... I mean, what? On one hand, who are the most powerful women in the history of the wrestling business?
Well, maybe I didn't do it chronologically. I guess. We've always just assumed that everybody knew and we would talk about stories, but she started in, oh my God, I'm going to say 1946-ish, 47-ish, as selling tickets. Back in those days, Nick Goulas and Roy Welch, a lot of wrestling promotions in those days had offices at various downtown hotels. You'll see that even carried on in New York until, the 70s, early 80s. They kept that office at the Holland Hotel and before Madison Square Garden. John Arezzi talked about it. You'd have to go and get your press pass and everything. And all the, Gorilla Monsoon and Arnie Skoland, all those guys would be sitting around and Arnie smoking a cigar, whatever. It was like a fucking 40s wrestling office. And the old boxing movies, same thing. They would have a suite of the rooms that they would use for the wrestling office, and they'd conduct business out of there. And especially it was in Nashville, since Nick and Roy operated the booking office there where they booked talent all out across to the different promoters in several states. Well, at first, Christine Jarrett, Jerry's father had been, it was in World War II. I can't remember what branch of the service. But then they had split up, she and his father. And so she took I believe it was a second job, selling the tickets, because one of their ticket outlets downtown also, whether it be the wrestling office or whatever, was a shoe store. And so she was in the thing is, wrestling, think about this. They ran every week at the Hippodrome downtown, drew 3,000-4,000 people a week every week. There was no ticket master. If you wanted to get advance tickets, you either went to the wrestling office or went to the shoe store, went to the other place, or you got them at the ticket window that night, an hour before the matches. So this was a steady business that the promoters had, selling tickets out of these ticket outlets. Well, she was so efficient and, good at it that gradually they gave her a job in the office itself, working for Nick and Roy. There was another secretary there named Nina Bond that they played a lot of tricks on her, the old X-Lax, chocolates and things. And she's the one, Nina was, that Sam Bass and Roy Welch played the rib on when fucking Sam Bass went in to complain about his payoff and the door was closed. She heard the gunshot. She runs in and Roy Welch made her fucking help take Sam Bass's body down and dump it in the dumpster out behind the hotel. They went down the service entrance and then went back up the same way, but Sam Bass jumped out of the dumpster and ran around front and was sitting in the fucking chair when she walked back in the office, still playing dead. Anyway, it was fun back in those days hanging around the wrestling offices. So Teeny started working in the office and ended up doing, a variety of the bookkeeping and ticket sales. And she for years worked in the ticket office every night that the matches in Nashville ran. And of course, when Jerry was born in a couple years before she got the job even selling wrestling tickets. But as he got older, by the early 50s, he's 7 or 8 years old, and he's running around the Hippodrome selling the 5 and 10 cent wrestling programs. And so while she's working in the office and doing paperwork and tickets and all the things you do in a wrestling office, Jerry would go to the matches and would see the Fargos and see Luthez and all that stuff, and that's where he got, the mind for it. So when Roy Welch decided to put Jerry in charge of booking Memphis in like 67 or 68, he was only like 23, 24 years old, which that was unheard of in those days. But you can kind of tell by the way that the business flourished right after that. They had been doing things in Memphis the old way from back in the 40s for the same way. And he kind of jazzed things up, different kind of matches, new booking. He brought some of the heroes like Jackie Fargo and Al Green back, but he got new guys in like Jerry Lawler and Jim White, blah, blah, blah. While he's doing that, at the same time, once he started booking Memphis, he wanted to, because he was smart enough to know, and his mother worked in the office for years, and Christine Jarrett was very careful with a penny, and she would squeeze a nickel until the buffalo farted. So she passed that on to Jerry Jarrett, and he was looking for towns to open up and run as a promoter. He knew that's where the money was. So when finally he found, he had been advised that the only really stretch of dark towns at that point in time, anywhere around the territory, on any adjoining end, was Evansville, Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. We've mentioned that before. Bruiser had stopped running Louisville and Evansville, and there'd been no live wrestling for several years. So when he finally was able to come up here and get television, he made his mother partners with him in Louisville Wrestling Enterprises. And at that point, that was 1970. So before Ann Gunkel, and I know the young rock folks might have a problem with this, but before Lee Maivia, because this was before Peter Maivia even died or even was a promoter himself and owned the territory in Hawaii, before anybody really but Eileen Eaton, Christine Jarrett was the co-promoter of several regular weekly towns as part of the Big Gulas Welch territory. And of course, then they both got kind of, she still kept the job working in Nick and Roy's office. But in addition to those duties, she would go to Louisville every Tuesday night and Evansville every Wednesday night. And in the early years, they were off and on in Lexington, depending on the TV or whatever. So she was on the road 2 and 3 days a week, and then she promoted spot shows off of those televisions. So in addition to the office job, and she did a lot of work out of her house, and she was on the road 2 or 3 days a week, and that was for a number of years until finally, Jerry split off, and then that's another thing. We've told that story before, and it kind of affected Teenie also. Nick Gulas had said, "Yeah, boy, if you get TV in those towns, you open them up. You get the talent from us and pay it a 10% booking fee," because he didn't think that Jerry could make the towns go. So he was just going to book guys out to him for the 10% fee. But when he found out what the business Louisville started doing after the first 2 or 3 months, that's what he told Jerry. Well, we're partners. So all of a sudden, instead of 100% of Louisville Wrestling Enterprises between Jerry and Christine, they had 50 because the office in Nashville had 50. And that was the first 7 years till he got rid of his unwanted partner. And then they were kicking in 10% to Bruiser and Snyder, who got mad when Louisville started doing big business. But yeah, I would say and I know that there's the longevity factor with Eileen Eaton in Los Angeles, even though she had various other people in the office helping her. But when you talk about just towns that she was specifically responsible for, I would say between 1970 and she finally got mostly off the road and stopped going to Louisville and anything but Nashville probably in early 90s. So for a 20-year period, Christine Jarrett was actually the promoter ran more pro wrestling events than not only any woman in the country at that time, probably almost any time period, and probably more because there's at least 3 shows a week for 20 years. So probably more than most men. And she never booked anything. She was not a booker, because people get that confused. She handled all of the relations with the television stations and the contracts with the TV station, the contracts with the building, the dealings with the State Athletic Commission in Indiana and in Kentucky. They had one in Indiana back in those days. All the ticketing, the sponsors for the spot shows, the booster groups, the football field or the football team over at the high school that's having the spot show to raise money for new uniforms. She's sending them the tickets. She's sending them the posters. She delivered the TV tapes back when you did that kind of thing to the TV station. Every week when she came into town, her first stop was at the TV station, pick up last week's tapes and give them this week's tape. Then she'd go to the building. Then she'd check up at the box office to make sure that the advance was counted and that everything was accounted for, while whoever her driver was, maybe Pat Malone's wife or her niece Donna or whoever, would open up the merchandise stand and get that all set out. And then she'd go back in the back and check all the guys in, made sure they had a license so she could send in the report to the commission. She was there till the end of the show, because then you had to check up afterwards. And then she would call in, make sure that Jerry knew what the house was. And, of course, all the cash would go with an Eddie Marlin or a Bill Dundee or somebody that was going to be considerably more difficult to relieve of that briefcase than Christine might have been if she stopped on the side of the road at night. But, I mean, that was 3 or 4 towns a week for 20 years. It was insane, the amount of just paperwork and details that she was able to keep up with. And then you talk about placing advertising. In the smaller towns, they'd still do newspaper. Here, they still did newspaper. In Louisville and the smaller towns, they did posters and getting all that stuff printed and getting the cards from whoever was booking and making sure all that was done. It was insane.
There have been various women in high-profile roles in wrestling in recent years. Stephanie McMahon, Dixie Carter. Obviously, you mentioned Eileen Eaton and Gunkel. Do you think there's ever been a woman who understood the inner workings of a promotion and had to, from A to Z make things happen like Christine Jarrett?
No, because nobody had that much experience. She had, like I said, for 25 years before the 20 years that I just mentioned that she actively was a licensed promoter, she worked inside the office of one of the biggest booking offices in the country. They ran 3 towns a night minimum in that whole territory during the 50s, 60s glory period. So 20 shows a week. She saw everybody come through. She's the one that, remember, Jack Pfeffer memorialized it on one of the postcards that's still in the Pfeffer collection in Notre Dame when he wrote, "This was the night Christine Jarrett threatened, Treaten, threatened to kill me." Because he was trying to pull his shit. She always, every time that she would talk with disdain about somebody, she would compare them to Jack Pfeffer. I'm talking to her, this was in the 60s. I'm talking to her in the late 70s, and she, very Jack Pfefferish. Or like there was this one outlaw guy that ran outlaw shows, and there was only one back then. You only had one outlaw promotion at a time. A guy named Don Pruitt that would run shows in Kentucky using outlaw guys. And he had refereed for Nick and Roy years before, but got on the outs with him or whatever. And she'd had some kind of Don Pruitt outfit. But no, she had seen every major name come in and out. She had seen every kind of promotional war. She was there when in the office, they were already running Nashville and Chattanooga. When she started, she was there when they bought Birmingham from Joe Gunther in 1953 because Nick always wanted to run his hometown. And she was there when Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller annexed Memphis and led to that whole thing. So she got to see all that. And it was 2 different territories, but she was in the middle of it because she was handling paperwork for everything. So while Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks are doing all this business and Roy Welch's pet town down in Memphis, Lynn Rossi and Bearcat Brown or whoever the fuck are selling out Birmingham, and she's getting all the reports. So she, had just more experience than almost anybody, man or woman, ever had in wrestling.
I have a bunch of programs from 59 in Memphis, and they have her handwriting at the very top center of the first page of each program, and it says attendance, and then she writes in what the attendance was for that week.
Where did you get those from, you no good bastard?
I just happened to get those.
And her handwriting was very distinctive. Very neat and cursive, right?
That's right.
And
like yours. Yours is very neat and cursive.
Well, but hers was very more neat and cursive, even though she didn't curse. One of the greatest souvenirs I have is she paid me for pictures one time, and this was before Jarrett and Goulas split off. So she was taking the money back to the Goulas office, right? Because that's where it all got split. But she paid me in cash out of the house, and I still have the $100 bill money wrapper where in her handwriting she had written Nick Goulas on a $100 bill, $100 wrapper. And that was, but that's the thing is that almost anything that came out of that office for years was touched by Christine Jarrett. What was the attendance on some of those?
Some of those, I mean, I don't have them in front of me, but you would see like 7,800. And you're thinking like, wow, 1959 Memphis, that's pretty impressive.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you for telling me about this just out in front of God and everybody in public on the air, because us particular Memphis historians have been trying to track down for a while exactly what the seating capacity was of the Ellis Auditorium when they had it all the way opened up. And 8,000 has been an estimate, and it's nice to know that we were probably about right.
Hold on, I actually just dug up a pile of these.
All right, now I've just got you going, right?
So July 27th, 59, which is Sputnik Monroe against Spider Galento in the main event.
That's Al Spider Galento to you.
That's right. 7,800 people.
Yeah.
And then June 29th, 59, Sputnik and Billy Wicks. Now, I believe this may be outdoors, actually. But attendance is 8,000.
Well, hold on one second. I'll be getting a book while you're reading those. Go ahead.
Trying to see if there's any other ones in this pile I picked up that have the attendance figure at the top, and it doesn't appear they do. But there it is, a couple of attendance figures.
Hold on, I'm trying to find the right book. My daggum, where'd my books go? Where'd my daggum books go?
What an episode this has been so far, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, for heaven's sake, you know it is. You know it is, brother. If Jace just wants to make here we go, the 1950s. What'd you say, July? One of your dates was July 1659?
July 27th, 59, and June
July
29th.
27th. Okay. That was at the Ellis Auditorium, the main event, Sputnik Monroe against Al Spider Galento. Also, Billy Wicks against Treacherous Phillips. Tom Drake, who would later go on to serve in the Alabama State Legislature, against the Mighty Yankee, and Red Roberts, one of the top heels in Tennessee history, against Rocky Colombo.
Well,
and then, go ahead.
I was going to say, in Christine Jarrett's red ink, cursive, attendance, 7,800.
Yes. So then they had a show on August 3rd. That was the first Russwood Park outdoor show with Billy Wicks and Sputnik Monroe, and they drew 10,157 according to the newspaper report.
I got that program right here.
Okay. Then they came back on August 10th, and it was Sputnik Monroe against Jesse James for the Southern Junior Heavyweight title, and Billy Wicks and Tretch Phillips, and there's no attendance listed. And that's when you've got August 17th, right?
I'm missing August 10th, but I have the big one from August 17th, yeah.
Okay, August 17th was Russwood Park, the rematch, Sputnik Monroe, Billy Wicks, Rocky Marciano refereed, and that was the newspaper listed 13,749 paying customers. By legend and also newspaper reports and by Buddy Wayne's eyewitness testimony, when they couldn't get anybody else in the park and they locked the gate, the people busted down the outfield fence and approximately 3,000 or so that were milling around outside were able to get in. So they believe that by the time that Monroe and Wicks got in and there is some kind of brief 8mm film of just a bit of this, and there's just a few pictures, but there was like
I didn't know there was film. I never heard that before.
Well, I don't know if it was film. There's film of one of these outdoor shows, just a clip that I've seen of the atmosphere and Sputnik going to the ring on an outdoor show. Don't even know if it was this night, but there are definitely pictures. But the point is, the people there was like 17,000 people in a stadium that sold out at 13.5 or whatever, and it's still to this day, when you take into account everything in total, the most people that ever saw a wrestling match in the city of Memphis, Tennessee, because the WWF never did a pay-per-view in the big building without the stage. What was the Pyramid at the time, without the stage and everything? They never did 17,000 people. They couldn't get that in the Mid-South Coliseum, and Jerry Jarrett never ran a major outdoor event to try to break that record. So it's after 62 years, it pretty much still stands. That's how hot they were in 59. And then they went outdoors again. As a matter of fact, hold on here, because after the big match on August 13th, hold on, I'm finding it, or August 17th, rather, they went back to the Ellis Auditorium for Sputnik Monroe and Spider Galento the following week, and then Sputnik and Jesse James the following week, and then Sputnik and Spider Galento the following week, and Sputnik and Spider Galento the following week, where the paid attendance was announced at 7128, and then they went back outdoors for Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks again on September 21st. And there's no attendance listed, but one would imagine it was in the 8,000 to 10,000 range.
And then I got the program for a week later, Sputnik versus the Mighty Yankee, September 28th, 59. Promoter offers $50 reward for bottle throwers. Promoter Buddy Fuller said recently he would pay anyone $50 who will identify anyone throwing a bottle or dangerous object towards the ring. He says he intends to stop the bottle throwing, even if it means someone going to jail, as the fans around the ringside must be protected against such danger. Many plainclothes officers will be stationed throughout the balcony to positively identify those persons throwing objects. They will be taken to jail, where they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No bottle throwing.
By gum. And do you know what happened on October 12th? You've heard this story. If I told this story recently, you mentioned we have new listeners.
You talking about Sputnik at the fair?
Well, Sputnik at the main event on October 12th, 1959, that was advertised for the Ellis Auditorium, Sputnik Monroe versus Kid Marley. You're about to say who?
Well, you've talked about this on the air, so I know who Kid Marley is. But who?
Well, then we won't tell that story again. But basically, we're skipping over the entire story, which is available on our YouTube somewhere. The Sputnik and some fucking cowboy at the rodeo at the fair got in a fight, and Sputnik ended up on the front page of the newspaper in Memphis with a big black eye and a cut cheek, where the cowboy had fucking punched him in the face when Sputnik had gone to try to fight Gene Barry, who was Bat Masterson, appearing at the Memphis Fair. Anyway, basically, when they got that publicity, you would imagine, wrestling promoter Buddy Fuller got the credit for it. You would imagine either Roy Welch or Buddy Fuller, one of the others, said, well, we got something here. And since Sputnik blamed him getting knocked out on either slipping in cow shit or what, he caught him, he sucker punched him, he wasn't looking. So they announced on television that, as a matter of fact, I'll read it. Wrestling promoter Buddy Fuller insisted yesterday that Kid Marley, a 202-pound cowboy from Paris, Tennessee, will appear on tomorrow night's mat card at the auditorium. In fact, he has officially announced that Marley, who got a barrel of publicity for himself and Sputnik Monroe during the Mid-South Fair, will appear. They offered this guy $1,500 in 1959. What would that be? That's 10 grand easily, right? Today.
I would think, yeah.
They went on TV, Sputnik challenged him, and Buddy Fuller came out, and the promoter said, we'll give him $1,500 if he shows up and gets in the ring in the main event at the Ellis Auditorium against Sputnik. And this was from Buddy Wayne, who was around at the time. The guy didn't show up because he sent word, fuck you. At first, they had actually talked to him once, I think. As a matter of fact, he turned down $1,000. That's what, in another one of these articles, it says he turned down $1,000. But then they offered $1,500 and he just didn't show up. And he sent word. He said, I know you guys are trying to sucker, which they probably were. You guys are trying to sucker me in there, and Sputnik Monroe's going to kill me. Which, whether Sputnik could or couldn't have, he probably wouldn't have got out of the Ellis Auditorium in good shape. But anyway, they had a fucking huge amount of publicity for this. So when the real cowboy didn't show up, they brought somebody else in there and named him Jimmy Jones and said he was from the Cowboys' hometown, and Sputnik beat him up. I love wrestling.
Well, on that topic, let me conclude our Christine Jarrett portion of the show here by asking you, because you got to know her a different way than most people did, your mother became close friends with her.
Yes. You
guys were, I don't know if you put it this way, but you guys were often on the road with Christine Jarrett, going to these shows. Did she enjoy it? I mean, was it, this is work, so I'm doing it? Was it eventually, this is my family business, I don't mind it? Or was it actually, I enjoy what I do?
No, she enjoyed it. She didn't enjoy certain parts of it like we all do. Not wanting to deal with Elmer Fudd, the Kentucky State Athletic Commissioner, or, whatever. But no, she was never grumpy about the normal things about her job. She was always friendly, always hello, welcoming everybody, saying hello to the boys when they came in. That was her weekly routine. She never drove a car. So she always had a driver, but like I said, whether it was Sammy Malone, Pat Malone's wife, or we got to do a show about Pat Malone sometime, the Green Shadow, but or whether it was her niece Donna, or whoever. Sometimes Mike Duncan, her nephew, would ring announce. He did TV for him in the 70s, did some of the ring announcing in Louisville in the 80s. He'd come up, whatever. But her normal routine, she was always very efficient, pleasant, energetic. When I think back at what her age was then and how much energy she had, I'm like, geez, I don't know how in the world she did it. But it was definitely the family business. She was very protective of not only their business. That's probably where I got my disdain for the Outlaws, because that's the first place I heard the term. But her point was correct. These fly-by-night, low-level, outlaw local things that would pop up from time to time damaged the reputation of her business with newspapers or school sponsors or television stations or whatever. And she'd been there for 30-something years, and she'd seen that happen. And it's the same thing. Every time you get somebody, that thinks they can get in the business and do this, you invariably have that outlaw kind of behavior that runs people off from. She wanted her business to be, even though people might not like wrestling at the TV station or at the radio station or the newspaper, they might not like it, but they need to be respectful of it, because she was respectful of theirs. Like at Channel 11, when WHAS was the biggest newscast here in town, late 70s, they showed the footage of her not allowing them to come in the building. They had come and done a story on wrestling a year or two beforehand for the 6 o'clock news, and they had, well, it's obviously fake, and they kind of made halfway fun of the fans and the people who came, and it was not a flattering piece. So a year or two later, the people at the Gardens, Buzz Teeny, hey, Miss Jarrett, TV news is here. And she goes out front, and they're standing there. I can't remember what the sportscaster's name was now. God damn it. It's been 40 years. But anyway, and the camera guy and the audio guy, I'm watching this, right? And they were just amazed that she didn't want them to come in her building, that they had to get clearance. And she said, "You're not welcome here." And you should have seen the look on her face. I said, well, we're going to give you publicity. And she said, "The last time that you came here, you put on the 6 o'clock news that my business was phony and that my people, the fans that come and buy tickets from me, were not the best kind of people, and we don't need your kind of publicity. You look in there, you see what we've got in there, 4,000 people. Why do we need your kind of publicity? You're not allowed in here. Please turn around and leave." Hey, kick the TV news out. I'm like, yeah. And they showed that. They showed themselves being, well, we tried to cover the wrestling matches and got snide about it, right? But fucking A, she would never curse. She would never yell or raise her voice. But when she looked you in the eye, especially when she gave you the grip, we've talked about the grip, one thumb on one cheek and the middle finger of the on the other cheek, and pucker your mouth up a little bit and get right in front of you and say, "You listen to me, so-and-so." That's all she needed.
Well, Jim, perhaps somewhere listening to this segment is Jeff Jarrett, WWE Hall of Famer. Speaking of former Impact champions, at one point he was a champion over there, whatever it was called. But maybe he's hearing this and thinking, I wish I had in my office a frame featuring tons and tons of photos of my grandmother, who I love so much.
Well, I can fix him up, because if you have a beloved grandmother, a beloved granddaughter, a beloved grand anything, if you love anybody that you want a picture of, even if you don't love them, but you want a picture of them to remind yourself of what they look like so you don't let them on your property, whatever, the folks at Skylight Frames can fix you up. We've been talking about them here on the program. The gorgeous 10-inch touchscreen on the designer, beautiful looking Skylight frame that sets up almost effortlessly and looks like a real photo frame, but instead has a veritable plethora, a cornucopia, a slideshow of pictures that you can send. You can preload them on the frame and then give them the frame to somebody, or you can give somebody the frame and then you can send them the pictures remotely, however it works. For Mother's Day coming up, surprise mom with pictures of the whole family. She opens up the box, she turns the thing on, and boom, the whole family is right there sliding across her screen. Just go to skylightframe.com. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME, skylightframe.com, first of all, to look at what I'm talking about. They're amazing. And then, if you go to skylightframe.com and enter the code DRIVE, DRIVE, you'll get $10 off your purchase of a Skylight frame. Have we mentioned the phrase Skylight frame? That's all you need to know about it. So whether it's your family, your friends, your pets, candid photography, whatever the case may be, if you want to give somebody a frame that you can then stick pictures in at all hours of the day and night from thousands of miles away if necessary, boy, this is a miracle of modern technology.
Skylight frames.
How many do you have now? Of these things? Various, because I know you got one in every room with all the pictures of you at various stages of your life.
And the Mets.
So that you can reflect on yourself from time to time. But do you have more for other people in the family?
There are two right now in Last Manor. There is one right now residing in Last Manor South, which is what I will call my father's house right now. And those are the only ones right now that I know of in the Last family. However, I have talked so glowingly about Skylight frames that I'm sure one of the many, many family members must have also purchased this.
That's true. And I'm sorry to hear your dad's gone south.
Yeah, me too. Makes two of us. Florida. Ugh.
I thought you meant South New Jersey.
God, no. I would not wish that upon him or anyone.
I'll tell you, I'm from South Jersey. That's what that limo driver that got us lost at the Great American Bash 86 in Washington, D.C. Me, Bobby Eaton, Dennis Condrey, and the Barbarian in a stretch limo with apparently who looked like a fucking Guido from the Jersey Shore driving it. And every time he's asking for directions, hey, I don't know where I'm going. I'm from South Jersey.
Well, Jim, before this show goes too much further south, let's get some more questions in here. This next question sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Noah in England. I saw on the Dynamite review for the Young Bucks match, I saw on well, there's some grammar problems here, but what he's saying is, I saw the Dynamite review.
Now, be kind.
That was kind.
Maybe he's just nervous.
I thought that was very kind. I saw the Dynamite review for the Young Bucks match and noticed he didn't comment on their shoes. They were wearing the Dior Jordan 1s, which currently cost $10,000.
What?
With Jim not being a fan of Miro's $1,000 pink Mickey Mouse Gucci shirt, I wonder if he was a fan of the Dior Jordan 1s.
Okay, is there seriously a pair of tennis shoes that sells for $10,000?
Well, there's a big market for the world of, as you put it, tennis shoes or sneakers, especially Jordans. I didn't know they were $10,000.
$10,000?
It seems excessive to me. I wear flip-flops, but there are people who seem to go for this kind of thing.
Well, I didn't have any opinion or didn't mention it because I never look at shoes people wear to begin with, especially the Cucamonga kids, and I can't fathom that anybody would pay $10,000 for a pair of tennis shoes. But if, possibly did they just, write Dior on them and they're really just regular tennis shoes? I'm trying to think of some way to not just call them complete idiots, but apparently they're complete idiots.
So you don't even think they would purchase?
They're in their 30s and they've got kids and they would spend $10,000 on tennis shoes. Indicates to me that they didn't spend maybe they got them free. Maybe some idiot Mark gave them to them, or elsewise they're just complete imbeciles, because how long do they think they're going to be able to keep the wool pulled over enough people's eyes to be making the kind of money they're making now? They better, if I were them, I'd have a Christmas Club account opened up. I don't have anything to say to something like that.
What is the most you've ever spent on sneakers?
Let me think. Remember, did I ever tell you the story of when I got the shoes in bulk when I moved to Connecticut?
No, I don't remember that story. Shoes in bulk.
When I moved to Connecticut and started working in the Titan office, they expected you to dress up. Now, this is the first time that I had ever had a job where they expected you to dress up, except if I was on television. And so I got some new clothes and I made the mistake. See, all those years when I had suits on, when I was managing, the dress shoes that I got, I always had custom soles put on, because you can't run around ringside in slick soled dress shoes. Say that 3 times fast. You'll bust your ass, right? So the very first, when I got in the business to wear dress shoes with a suit, but still not to kill myself, I took them to, what do they call it? The shoe people, a shoe cobbler of some description. Yes, the cobbler gentleman. And I had treaded rubber soles put on them. Well, anyway, that's the only kind of dress shoes I ever had. Well, since I'm going to the office, I get some new stuff. I get a pair of dress shoes, just regular old shoes. First time in my life I'd ever really worn those. Within 3 months, I had such incredible foot pain I could barely fucking walk. Because my feet are so flat, you cannot shove a credit card underneath my arch if I'm barefoot standing on the floor. I mean, my feet are so flat they look like eggs on a frying pan. And I couldn't hardly fucking walk in those shoes. I said, fuck. And I said, I'm going to get some black shoes that, unless anybody stares at them, they won't look out of place with a suit or with dress clothes or whatever, but I'm going to get something I can walk in. So I went and I found this pair of, there's some type of designer or something, Nike or fucking whatever, not a Dior thing. But they were like hiking shoes. And they were high top, which I'd always worn when I wrestled anyway, as high top tennis shoes, because I didn't want to look like a wrestler and have boots. So these are comfy and I can walk on these like crazy and I can stand on my feet at the studio and I can do all this stuff. Well, then, because not only are my feet flat, but also I have an odd way of walking from various fucking knee injuries and etc. So, boy, this is a scintillating conversation on the show today. So my soles started wearing unevenly, And then the shoes were kind of getting worn, and I said, I need to get a new pair. So I go to the mall to the same store that I'd gotten these shoes the previous year. They said they've discontinued those. Well, I love these shoes. Well, we don't have any. So I went to another place in the mall. They discontinued it. We don't have any. The third place I went, the guy recognized me. He said, I don't have any, but I know where you can get them because they were discontinued. So this fucking place here got all that was in the stock or whatever. You call this number. I called. They had 12 pair of those shoes in my size. So, and whereas one pair had been, you asked the question, how much, one pair was like $90. This was 1996. When I went back the next year, I could get a dozen of them because they'd been discontinued for 30-something bucks a piece. So sign me up. So I did. They shipped a dozen pair of these identical shoes to me in Connecticut, and that was 1997. And finally, I had to buy more shoes in 2012. And because when my last pair was getting really beat up, and I was thinking, oh shit, and concurrently at the same time, that's when I was having the physical therapy on my hip, and I went in my first physical therapy appointment, and he looked at my shoes and he said, you should not be wearing these. I said, well, this is all the shoes I've worn for the past 14 years. And he said, well, that may be part of your problem. And he made me get low top, lighter shoes, because these things were fucking Herman Munster boots. Low top, lighter shoes, helped me walk better, did the physical therapy. And then I broke down and he gave me the kind of shoes that I should buy. And I spent like $125 or $130 on that pair of shoes. And I kept those until the big calcium deposit on my right big toe from where Nikolai Volkov put my fucking foot back in the goddamn socket in the right position. It will wear holes in my shoes because it's sticking out there on the side, sort of like, John the Hunchback's hump. And so I've had to get another pair since then. But I get a pair of shoes about every 3 years or so. Is that too much detail?
That was a lot of detail, but...
So when you think about it, since 1996, I've only had 14 pair of shoes, and the most I paid was 130-something bucks.
Not bad. Certainly the young bucks could learn a thing or two from you about savings.
There you go.
All right, well, let's get another question here on the show. Jim,
I'll be glad to go into as much detail on this one as I did on the last one.
Jim, this one was sent on Twitter using a hashtag CornyDriveThru from Robert Kollick. Was Steve Austin's Austin 316 promo the most important promo in wrestling history?
Possibly, definitely the most impactful. I mean, there's been great promos. Everybody, there's millions of people that can quote Dusty's Hard Times.
But no one, it's weird with that one, because no one, when I was tape trading in the 90s, no one ever talked about that promo. It just somehow in the early decade, the first decade of the century, I don't know if it's because WWE started using it in various collections they did, but I had never really heard people rave about that promo up until 20 years ago.
Well, and we talked about this one time before, a long time ago on the show. It wasn't as impactful to me or to people who worked with Dusty in the 80s. That was just a Dusty promo, not to say that it was bad, but to say that they were all that good. He'd sit in his office on Wednesdays when we were doing interviews at Crockett's office, and he'd only come out for like Philly or Baltimore or Atlanta, the big show. And then he'd go back in his office, right? And we'd be doing, Columbia, South Carolina. But Gene Anderson would just say, okay, I got to go get Dusty. And we'd sit there for a couple minutes and he'd come in, roll camera, boom. He would cut something like that for fucking Philly on a local promo and then walk back out and say, let me know when you need me, baby. And so every week on the syndicated TVs, the promos were like that. But anyway, yeah, there's been great promos and promos people quote, but as far as a direct, impact on not only that particular guy getting really over, but business in general, I don't know I can think of another one. Can you?
Most important promos in wrestling history.
I mean, you could say in another way, if the promo that Vince cut on the simulcast when he bought WCW and he was on both shows at the same time, that was important. It wasn't necessarily great, and it didn't really do a lot for business.
I hate to stick to 1996, but Hogan's promo joining the NWO after he turned heel, and people were throwing garbage all over the ring. That was a pretty important promo. Of course, WCW didn't survive, but for a time there, it really launched him into a whole new stratosphere.
And that's got to be on the list, but it still can't be as big as Austin 316 because Hogan rejuvenated himself, switching heel, something people thought that they'd never see in a new atmosphere with new people to play off of it, etc. So that was big, but he'd already been the biggest star in wrestling. Austin was about to be, and that was, a big thing in getting him there, just where people hooked onto it, took notice, not only bringing the signs, but also just the whole vibe of Austin. And we talked about it on, when we talked about the biography last week, and it's the same thing with Piper, and it's the same thing with most all these guys you're going to see, is they were into who they were, and they gave that vibe off. And, so that promo was something that people just hooked onto as getting into Steve Austin in general, just because that was the perfect example of Steve Austin. Well, Austin 316 says, I just whipped your ass. He don't put up with anything. He don't take shit off of anybody. That's what they wanted.
Well, Jim, we have some breaking news of sorts.
Breaking news? Well, if it's broken, we'll fix it.
Well, it will not be broken by the time this show comes out. Everyone will know about it, but people are sending this to me now. Someone on Twitter named John Orand, who works for the Sports Business Journal. A couple of tweets here. NBC pulls out of the NHL bidding process. So that, of course, means USA Network will not be airing the NHL after all.
Ooh!
However, a second tweet, per a source, Turner Sports is likely to pick up the rest of the NHL's media rights package.
Whoa!
Wouldn't that be something?
Reversal! Reversal, ladies and gentlemen, on a so that if they were to would they put NHL hockey on TNT or on TBS on Wednesdays? Hockey doesn't go on TBS, does it? That's TNT is their sports network.
Well, hockey doesn't go on any of the Turner networks, but...
Well, I mean, if they got it.
It would be a better fit on TNT, I would think, than TBS. Hold on, let me click this and see if anyone is saying anything. Like I said, this is breaking news. Actually, the first comment here, does this mean the NHL will air on TNT on Wednesdays? And the next comment is, hard to imagine they would bump AEW on TNT.
Hard to imagine they would bump fucking I Love Lucy.
Can you imagine they move NXT, partly because at least the NHL coming to USA. Now they announced that they're not coming to USA. They may go to TNT.
AEW to Tuesday, anyone?
Well, we'll have more information about this, I'm sure, later on this week on The Experience, when more news is known about this major shakeup in the sports rights world of television. But Jim, let's get another question here on the show. This one sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Lee in Manchester, UK. I agree with pretty much everything Jim has to say about wrestling. But I
like this guy already.
But I disagree with some of the comments made about The Fiend.
Oh, boy.
I think he was one of the most exciting characters in wrestling when he re-emerged with a split personality gimmick a couple of years ago. There was a ton of potential for the character, and like The Undertaker, a character you could have built huge angles around without even having to have him near any of the belts. Some of the booking has been rotten, and this year's WrestleMania match was atrocious. rather than telling the story of Bray's mental decline and the Fiend being the manifestation of the internalized rage, the silly buggers at WWE have instead focused on the daft supernatural tomfoolery. This has resulted in a daft pantomime instead of what should have been a dark psychological thriller. I do think there have been some great moments. For example, his debut against Finn Balor.
By the way, let me just say, when you use the phrase dark psychological thriller in conjunction with what is supposed to be a professional wrestling fucking promotion, you've already shit and fell back in it.
I do think there have been some great moments. For example, his debut against Finn Balor and the John Cena cinematic match last year was a masterpiece in storytelling.
What?
And I still think the character has potential to be one of the most memorable of the last 2 decades with some decent booking. My question is, how would Jim have booked The Fiend or Bray Wyatt's deranged split personality gimmick from the start?
First of all, the whole problem with The Fiend is exactly what's this fella's name that I'd formerly liked?
Well, he seems like a very
asking the question.
Dedicated listener. Lee from Manchester, UK.
Okay, but it's all about the story, the character, the dark psychological thriller, the writing. It's all fucking phony. If you want to have a fucking psychopath, that's fine. I'm all for people that are crazy. If you got a guy that he can convince people that he's crazy and dangerous, then that's a fucking attraction in wrestling. But when he does things that are blatantly phony or stupid, or they cross the lines of any sensible reasoning, such as teleporting himself from one place to another, or having gasoline poured on him and him burned alive in front of us, and coming back 3 weeks later, fuck you. It's a goddamn bunch of hot garbage. So I don't know how I would have booked him from the start, because I don't know whether he's willingly gone along with this or he's one of the people that they just make do this stupid shit. If he really wanted to be burned alive and have a 100-pound schoolgirl on a swing with stupid puppets and goofy music vomiting black sludge, I would have probably booked him a fucking one-way ticket back to where he came from. Because this whole thing is just probably the worst overall, the worst stuff that I have ever seen in wrestling. And over the last year and a half or 2 years, imagine how much that takes in, has probably 50% of it has involved The Fiend. Every time we see him, it's garbage. It's goofy fucking puppets appearing out of nowhere. It's fucking supernatural bullshit, black sludge vomit, being killed in front of us and then just getting up or whatever. No, it's totally unsalvageable. That's not even wrestling anymore. So I don't know what the fucking attraction is that anybody would be entertained by this horse shit. But no, I wouldn't book The Fiend except possibly a long stay at a fucking mental institution.
Yeah, I don't know who was out there saying, you know what wrestling needs? More puppets.
Yes, I mean, the whole thing, the Firefly Funhouse vignettes, the whole thing is an embarrassment to the business. So no, I wouldn't be booking him at all.
Do you try to do something to harness his talking ability? You wouldn't book him at all, or you wouldn't book him at all as a wrestler?
I haven't seen it. They used to, when we weren't watching this shit, I used to hear, oh, Bray Wyatt's really cool. He's a swamp guy with creepy brothers. Okay, well, that sounds good enough. Every time I see it, he's smattering nonsense in the most egregiously stupid and phony ways that they try to pawn off on us as him being a goddamn supernatural creature or whatever. I haven't seen a good match. I haven't seen a good promo. I don't know what the fuck's going on there. Somebody said it used to be better when it was Bray Wyatt and his, swampy brothers. And then it was spooky. But then apparently somewhere along the way, by the time we started watching, it got to be just ignorant.
Jim, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi.
All right.
Greg Valentine recently said he didn't trust Scott Steiner in the ring and was almost injured when Steiner botched a suplex in one of their matches. Valentine said, quote, "I gave him my back and he abused it, so I never trusted him again. But thank God we didn't have to wrestle them too many times." What are your thoughts on Valentine's take on Scott Steiner?
God, well, I mean, I always liked the Steiners, and you know, I know they're beasts, but they always, except when they were with guys like the Nasty Boys, they always seemed safe because they were so strong they could put you wherever they wanted you. And then some of those slobber knockers were just ridiculous, and they were landing on each other's heads and everything. But I can see also Greg Valentine saying that and what he means, and can agree with him, because here's the Greg Valentine was already wrestling 16 years before Scott Steiner ever got in a ring. So at what point was Scott Steiner trying to suplex? And Greg Valentine is not a guy that, you know, in the Crockett days, yes, he and Flair would trade vertical suplexes, but he wasn't used to being gut-wrenched and Germaned by a fucking beast from another world, or picked up in one of those Steiner screwdrivers or whatever. And I don't know why, honestly, that one would be working with Greg Valentine and think that that might be a good idea to pick Greg up and do that. It's not his kind of match. So I can see where Greg was like, what the fuck? Cause, you know, he's used to the match of him and Piper. They're chopping each other till blood comes out their chest pores, and they're potatoing each other with punches, and Piper's losing part of his hearing, and everybody's getting their eyebrows busted open, but nobody's being picked up and thrown halfway across the ring, landing on their head. That was I'm sure, a foreign style to Greg Valentine, and rightfully so. And I don't know at what time period this would have been that they were working together, but Greg had to be
probably WCW 92, if I had to guess.
Was Greg there then?
Greg was there. He was in a tag team. Was it him and Terry Taylor?
Good Lord. Wow. Somebody had a good fucking sense of humor there to team those two guys up. Well, okay, then there's Greg Valentine's 45 years old, Scott Steiner's 30, and Steiner's trying to throw Greg Valentine around the fucking ring. You know, I could see where that probably would have been a clash of styles.
Jim, did you ever hear anyone else complain about working with the Steiners?
Well, I mean, it depended. Anybody that they didn't enjoy working with might complain about them because the Steiners weren't enjoying working with them, so probably weren't, you know, being as nice as they could be. For whatever reason, I remember in the bunkhouse battle royals that, God, it would have been, what year? The 88, I guess, bunkhouse stampedes. Was that when the Zamboni
Scott wasn't
Express?
There. Scott wasn't there.
Scott
yet.
wasn't there. Then maybe it was 80. Whatever. There was some battle royals. Maybe they weren't even bunkhouses, but just battle royals where Scott just got the idea that he'd take fucking Ray Candy down and just hold him immobile in the middle of the ring. And I don't know why. But you know, sometimes, you know, it just depended on whether or not that they kind of respected you as to whether they'd be a little extra careful. But they weren't being reckless and trying to kill people. But the Steiners could actually kind of fuck you up just playing with you without you really, you know, without really meaning it, because they were so fucking stiff and strong and they didn't realize what they were doing. And sometimes they'd just, you know, fuck with you. I mean, there at TNA one time in Orlando, I'll tell you the story real quick. It seems to come up here. So Disco Inferno is one of the agents. And that's because he tickled Russo, because they're both New York fucks, right? And the stupid shit that he'd say about booking space aliens or whatever tickled Russo. So whenever Russo had any pull, he'd get Disco Inferno some kind of spot. So they were paying him to be an agent, but they'd give him the underneath matches because, I mean, Disco Inferno as an agent to set up wrestling matches. How about me as a fucking consultant to NASA on the moon rocket, right? And so they'd give him the underneath matches and stuff that he couldn't fuck up too much, but it was just there because he tickled Russo. And one day the Steiners, for whatever reason, because the main event guys just kind of it's Disco Inferno. He had a goofy gimmick. He was a comedy wrestler, as they talk about those lists these days. And what the fuck? So they fucking took him out in the parking lot and pulled his pants down around his ankles and duct taped his wrists and his ankles together, and I think gagged him or something else. And we're hoping that they'd open the gates where the fans would walk by and see him. But somehow he got halfway loose and hobbled back in. He had gravel fucking burns all over his knees and elbows and everything. But they weren't trying to be mean to him. It's just that's the way they played. I sometimes with Arnold, when they'd bring Scott's Pitbull Arnold, and he was a good worker, but he'd scare Bobby Eaton to death. And sometimes they'd get him after some of the other guys, and he'd tree guys in a fucking shit stall in the bathroom. His head was as big as a fucking toilet seat, the dog's was, and he'd be barking. And if you stuck your boot out at him, he'd take your whole foot in his fucking mouth. But that tickled them to death. So the Steiners they just play rough.
Okay, well, speaking of playing rough, our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Brian in Charleston, South Carolina. I saw an interview with Tony Atlas claiming that Mr. Fuji used to carry around LSD cookies with him back in the day and offer them to the other wrestlers. Are you aware of any Mr. Fuji stories similar to this one?
I cannot confirm or deny that because that was back in the 80s before the time that I was around Mr. Fuji, who, by the time I was working with him, had settled into the beloved old grandfatherly Japanese elder role and, wasn't getting around as quick as he used to, so he wasn't as sharp with the ribs. But I've heard the same thing about King Curtis, though. Kevin Sullivan told me that King Curtis, they'd take those flights in Australia, and King Curtis would have like this giant fucking, I don't know, cookie or sugar cube wouldn't be big enough, but just a big giant thing that was soaked in LSD, and he'd just take licks off of it like a deer takes a lick off a salt lick. And he'd be handing it to Lewin and all those guys. And I can't even imagine what that might be like while you're on an airplane, or what it might be like to be on an airplane as just a tourist in Australia with Mark Lewin, King Curtis, and a variety of the Australian World Championship Wrestling guys on LSD on the fucking plane. So, but I don't know about Fuji, but it did. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I'm not denying these things ever happened. I just have no firsthand knowledge.
Did you hear stories when you were up there about Fuji?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a famous ribber. And everybody, and a stiff ribber too, and everybody's known that for years. And I would like, because I always liked Fuji, I would like to think the story of him cooking the guy's dog and serving it to him is not true, because that would change the whole way that I look at the fucking guy or looked at the fucking guy. But one of the best ribs before I ever even met Fuji, Dennis Condrey told me about. When they were in Knoxville, Southeastern days, the late 70s, Fuji and Tanaka at one point were the Southeastern Tag Team Champions. But point is, Fuji wanted to play a rib on this guy. So the guy, one day he gets, and that was Southeastern was a short trip territory. So you'd get up and you'd leave, and maybe you'd go to the gym or you'd do something during the day. So the guy leaves his apartment, gets in his car, he's going to the gym, he's going to wherever, he puts a key in, nothing, won't turn over, won't do anything. Not like a dead battery, just nothing. What the fuck? Guy gets out, pops his hood. He's staring at the fucking pavement. There's no engine in his car. Apparently, they said Fuji spent like $1,000 to have somebody come over there in the middle of the night, take the engine out of the guy's car, and then once the rib registered, he put it back in for him. So, I mean, he was willing to go to lengths to fucking rib people, and everybody knew you treat Fuji with deference and respect. Yes, master. Yes, master.
Why do you think they kept him around for so long? I mean, he was one of those guys in the 80s a lot of people looked at and said, he is one of the worst managers in wrestling. But they always kept him around. They always used him well.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, for one thing, a lot of people, because they saw him as Mr. Fuji, the manager in the 80s, and then in the 90s when he was old and, broke down. And they don't remember that in the 60s and 70s, Mr. Fuji was one of the big bump-taking fucking wrestlers in the business. I mean, he would, slams off the top and big backdrops, and he drew money both as a single, especially out in Northern California, San Francisco territory, and he and Professor Tanaka were a big-time team. They were the WWF Tag Team Champions in the 70s, and so he had a 20-something year career, but he was never a great promo, but in the days where Japanese heels were big box office and he was one of the best ones of them, he worked steady and in top positions in most of the territories for quite some time. But, he was never a good promo, and he was almost immobile by the 90s because he had so many injuries and the bumps had taken their toll. Because you've seen some of the old 70s 8mm, 16mm footage where he's bouncing around the ring like a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And, that's what happens. And as to the reason they kept him around and made him a manager, it was every territory had somebody that the promoters always wanted to take care of because of what they had meant or what they had done. And it just depended on who it was and what the territory was. Every territory had Pat Malone watched the door in the Tennessee territory and several of the towns and gave the kids the wrestling magazines to go out and sell. And he had a lifetime job and we're going to talk about this on an upcoming program. We're going to get Scott Teal to do some historical perspective on some things, but he had been Roy Welch's right-hand man. He had set attendance records in every town in their territory in the 40s, caused riots, was a major heel at over a period of 10, 15 years in all parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, etc. So still 30 years later, as long as they were around, as long as the modern generation was around that had respect for him, he was going to have a job as long as he wanted it. Crockett took care of George Harris and Klondike Bill, and also Paul Jones, because Paul Jones had been in with George Scott and Crockett Sr. So Vince Sr., because he ran such a big territory for so long and because they weren't running on a shoestring and he had money to take care of guys, there were guys that he took care of because they owned part of the business or owned part of at least some of the territory at one time, like the Gorilla Monsoons and the Arnold Skolins. And there were also guys that he had promised his dad when he bought the company, I'll take care of them. They've been your backbones, Strongbow, Gorilla, Blackjack Mulligan. And those guys were taken care of pretty much until
Blackjack Mulligan.
I'm sorry, Blackjack Lanza. What in the world did I just say? I'm sorry, but Jack Lanza. And George Steele was another one of them. And then for various reasons, age or health or whatever, they retired or kind of on their own volition. They gave Strongbow a little shove because he was so fucking old and fat and immobile he couldn't even hardly get up out of a chair anymore. So they suggested that he retire. And then the first thing he did 2 months later was go appear on a WCW special after they'd carried his fucking fat, worthless ass for 30 years. That was kind of the way he repaid him. But the other guys, they were agents or whatever that they could do at that point in time, and they still contributed. But it was because of their seniority and the importance that they had been to the company years before.
You said fat, worthless ass. It is interesting how many guys have differing opinions of Jay Strongbow. What did you think of him?
Couldn't stand him, except he was occasionally entertaining when he'd come up with a one-liner, and Vince used to fucking die laughing when he's, well, Vince, they should have held that match in an iron lung. Nobody knew what that meant, but Vince was tickled by it, so it was halfway funny. But and I mean, he was just condescending to the young guys, I thought, even to the job guys or whatever. He just looked down his nose kind of at everybody, and he sat there and did as little as possible, and it just seemed like he felt like he was entitled. Let's face it, Chief Jay Strongbow was not a star anywhere else except the WWF because they wanted an Indian, and they made him one, even though he was Italian. Joe Scarpa in the 60s was a pretty good young babyface, but by the time he was Jay Strongbow, I mean, everybody's seen the fucking footage. Those matches were the shits. And I remember, who was it? Oh, God damn it. He told one of the guys one time, he said, well, the way you made your comeback, it all looked like bullshit. And the guy said, yeah, I should have started doing a war dance and whooping it up and dancing around the ring in a circle first, you know. But I really like George Steele, George the Animal Steele. I think he was a nice guy. He was very intelligent. He had a good mindset on wrestling. And I know a lot of people have knocked him. Bret Hart didn't like him. I never saw that. I thought he was good with matches. Jack Lanza was a prince of a guy. Gurria was stuck in the mud most of the time. He had the personality of Cabbage, but he was a nice guy. Just he's New Zealand and got a stick up his ass. But yeah, Strongbow contributed very little of anything except occasionally popping Vince in a production meeting.
When I was a kid and I didn't know any better, and you would see these things happen, and no one got identified by name, it was just, the agents are out there. You know, it'd be Tony Gurria, or the officials. The officials are out there, Tony Gurria and Rene Goulet. It's like, man, all these senior citizens have such funny hair.
I forgot about Rene Goulet, too. Sergeant Jacques Goulet. I liked him also. He was a nice guy, and he stayed in really good shape. Him and Gurria, after their wrestling days, they were always in good shape. Everybody else kind of fleshed out a little bit.
Well, you know, Jim, we were talking about Mr. Fuji, and it has been said that although it's been many years since Mr. Fuji passed, perhaps some of the victims of his vicious ribs want to get revenge on his estate right now. Perhaps they want to get together collectively and sue.
They want to sue? Well, if you want to sue, then I know who you should call to sue to get even for you.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Still to the rest.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, we do have to clarify that we have made Stephen P. New and newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084, literally household names, names and words that are on the tip of everyone's tongue out there across the podcasting world. And Stephen P. New has been successful over the past couple of years. He's now got the finest looking law office in West Virginia that he's moved into. And he has won all these cases, whether it be the nursing home abuse or the poisoning of the town in West Virginia, Minden, West Virginia, or whether it's the personal assaults by an actual doctor at the Veterans Administration, or whether it's the cancer-causing agents in certain household items, or whatever the case may be. We have finally run across one type of case that Stephen P. New regrets to inform us that he cannot handle or resolve. Brian, we've made him such a big name. He's now getting contacts, and we can't give details. He couldn't give details. That's attorney-client privilege, but he's asked us to say that he cannot take medical malpractice cases from the country of Nigeria, because apparently this was recently offered to him. And I think there's a jurisdictional issue with it. Before he can pack his shit up and move on the road out to Nigeria for this medical malpractice issue, he would have to get licensed, bonded, pass the bar. And we all know Stephen has a hard time passing a bar for that particular country. So if we can keep things within the continental United States that you require of Stephen P. New. He can serve you better right now, although he is, because of all the feedback he's gotten from our worldwide listeners, looking to open some type of international office in the near future, possibly a branch of newlawoffice.com on the space station. And that way he could just kind of look down at the world and pick the cases that are most deserving. I'm not sure if you could still call 888-692-8084 if he was on the space station, but I'm pretty sure that even the internet works in space, right? newlawoffice.com. But no medical malpractice in Nigeria.
For anyone who thinks you're doing a bit, this is a legit thing.
I'm not doing a bit.
Yeah.
This is, yes, he wanted us to let everybody know he would love to help everyone, but he is not admitted to the bar or whatever they have over there in Nigeria.
Well, Jim, before you brought up the idea of Chief Jay Strongbow dancing around the ring, on a similar topic, this question was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from David Brennan in Blackpool, England. Of course, the Baron of Blackpool is Alan Blackstock, as we all know. I have a question.
Well, and that is the home base of formerly Lord Stephen Regal, now William Regal. Was it not?
Yeah, I believe so.
He's from Blackpool.
After Alan Blackstock, he's the man who made Blackpool famous. But I have a question which has always been on my mind.
Or maybe is he the man that made Blackstock famous?
Well, we will have to find out in the weeks ahead here on the show. But here's David Brennan's question. I have a question, which has always been on my mind. Hulking up. The first time I saw a pay-per-view was SummerSlam 90. I genuinely thought Hulk Hogan had been injured, perhaps mortally. Do you know of the first match in which Hulk did the hulking up routine? Did it evolve over time? And how do you think today's audience would react to a wrestler doing this? Imagine someone doing it in the UFC. And Jim, this question, you heard the contents of it, but other people have sent in questions regarding the origins of hulking up.
Well, I just realized nobody does do that anymore, do they? Because there's no babyface comeback, because there's really no heel heat, because nobody knows what each other are.
You need fans to care in order to pull down the strap.
Yes. Yes, and that's the thing, hulking up, Hulk Hogan did not invent. It's been called that because he was so obvious with it. With Lawler, it was dropping the strap. With
Jay Strongbow was the war dance.
Jay Strongbow was the war dance. With Bearcat Brown, he did a fucking dance. I mean, kids in Louisville, when they got in fights in school in the early 70s, they would start to do Bearcat Brown's fucking swinging his fists out from side to side and kicking his foot up in the air like he was going to make the comeback. Every babyface that was, not everyone, but every babyface that was a main event star, that was over, that was a top guy or had been used in a position or had some oomph to him, not just every single schlub, had a manner of starting his comeback. And some elevated it to an art form. And so it's old as the hills that the babyface would be getting the shit kicked out of him, and then finally something would happen where you would detect that he was not going to put up with this anymore, or that he was starting to bow up, as we used to bow up. That's the way you'd call it in I guess at least in Southern wrestling. Bow up at me, come back, whatever. But they would gradually start showing that they had life, they had fire, whether it be a look up to the people in the bleachers, or whether it would be the way they would twist their fucking body when they would get hit, and you would start to see some erection go back in their spine or whatever. And Bob Armstrong did that. Every babyface down through the years that was over had some manner of doing that, and the key word is over, because the people had to give a shit. If the guy in the first match did it, they don't really care, right? If a guy that's not over does it, they don't give a fuck. But when you got in that position, when the people had paid to see you, and they're really invested in your selling, that's when, and I guess now a lot of people don't even understand what drop the strap meant. Lawler was the master. Hogan's I always thought was fucking not only from a visual standpoint, it was phony because he'd have everybody, including the biggest people in the world, just throwing shitty punches at his left shoulder while he walked away from him, shaking his fists. And that's shitty from a visual standpoint for the fans, but also from the guy working with you. Turn around, take a fucking punch so I can throw one that looks good, right? And then whether you sell it or not, that's immaterial, but just don't be walking away from me. Hogan's drove me crazy. But Lawler would be selling, and then suddenly he'd take a punch, boom, and instantly he'd turn his head and his back would shoot up straight, and he'd grab his chin and he'd start rubbing it, and he'd get a look on his face with his eyes crossed like it would be like a you motherfucker. A visual body language, you motherfucker, and the people would stop from the rumble that they had while he was getting beat on. They would pop, they'd roar, ooh, and then he'd take another shot, and he would recoil from that, but he would stand up even straighter and look back at the fucking guy with that look on his face. And the people would blow louder, and the heel might try one more time, boom, and pickle Lawler right in the face. And that time he wouldn't even sell it. He would then take that fucking right thumb, put it over the left shoulder strap, and drop the strap and put his hands up like he's ready to fight, and they would throw babies in the air. Before he had landed a punch, which they knew was coming, when the strap dropped, the people came to their fucking feet. And then he'd throw those punches, and every one he landed, they'd go, ooh, 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 ooh. And he'd make his big comeback. And every once in a while, with a Terry Funk, like we talked about in the first 5-star match, he'd drop the strap and he'd make a small comeback, but then he'd get stopped again because that's a big main event, and holy shit. And now even the strap hasn't worked. And the people would be more invested into it. But that type of thing with a babyface starting to bow up under punishment, starting to show life to the people, whether he's doing a little dance or a little jig, or whether he's shaking his head, or whether he's walking away or rubbing his face or whatever the fuck, if he did it long enough and established it and made it his trademark, the people knew to get with it. And that sometimes was the biggest pop of the comeback. Not what he did to the heel, but the fact that the moment of the bow up is the fucking time where they come. And then he fucking makes the comeback and they're with him. And once then they go into their finish and the people are hooked for whatever they do. But you don't see that anymore because nobody gives that much of a fuck.
Who invented, there have been so many Native American wrestlers or pretend Native American wrestlers. Who invented the war dance as a no-sell towards the end of the match to make your big comeback?
Oh, good Lord. Who knows?
Was Don Eagle doing that?
I'm sure he was. Danny Little Bear was doing it in 1972. Probably even before Don Eagle. There was... I don't know if, there was a famous Indian wrestler in North Carolina named Chief Sawnook, who ended up being the promoter in Asheville and was a prominent person around town because there's a lot of legitimate Native American Indian tribes in North Carolina. And I don't know if he went all the way into the gimmick, but in a lot of cases where they had Indian wrestlers in places where there weren't a lot of real Indians, they'd go full-fledged into because it was colorful, a feathery headdress, and the tom-toms. And Chief Thundercloud brought his teenage son, Chewy, along, and he was the drummer boy. Chief Bobby Bold Eagle was an Italian named Bob Boyer, but he had a headdress that was 7 feet long. It was incredible. The best part of seeing Bobby Bold Eagle was watching him come to the ring with the drums and the colored feathers and the whole 9 yards. What an outfit. Then the match started. Holy shit. So but when you think about it, especially in the era of the 30s and 40s, cowboy movies, John Wayne, whatever, the common vision of an Indian in those days was somebody doing a war dance. So when the Indian was the baby face, of course he's going to do a war dance to make his comeback and fucking vanquish the heel. So even if they were Italian Indians or Mexican Indians, or that was a big thing. Nick Goulas could take a Mexican wrestler and make him any nationality. It just depended on haircut and outfit. So whether they were real Indians, as some were, like Danny Little Bear, or whether they were Mexican Indians, like many were, or, you know, some Italian Indians, they all did the same thing because it was the stereotype in those days of people that had watched cowboy movies on television.
So going back to Hulk Hogan and hulking up, he wrestled in Memphis in '79. He would do a shot against...
He was Lawler's tag team partner when he first came to Memphis. Yeah, he saw Lawler do that.
And then he came back and worked against Lawler in, I think, '81. And, of course, he went up to the World Wrestling Federation. Jay Strongbow's there. Then goes to the AWA. I don't know who would have been doing something. I don't know what the Crusher did in his matches there, but...
see, for Crusher to make a hook up, that would have been intimidated that he sell, and Crusher never sold anything. But I mean, any baby face, yes.
But where do you think Hogan, if you had to guess, where do you think Hogan really got it from? Well, was Lawler doing it in '79?
God, yes. Lawler was doing it, and the first time he switched babyface in '77. That's when he started doing it. So yeah, I'm sure he got it from Lawler because I doubt Hulk Hogan went up there in 1981 to the WWF and said, "Hey, show me some 10-year-old Jay Strongbow tapes. I want to steal some shit." But he'd been Lawler's tag team partner when they brought him in and introduced him in Memphis. So he saw that in the Coliseum or in the Gardens every week. Cause this is not like that Lawler did not do this in 98 to 99% of the matches he ever had, and it never got old. The people probably had their feelings hurt if it didn't happen. So he definitely saw it, yeah. But I mean, that's not unique in wrestling. He'd been watching Florida. Dusty. Remember when Dusty would sell like he'd get down on his knees and have you get the ice clamp, the lazy man's hold on him, right? The nerve hold on the shoulder muscle by the Spock pinch. And he'd be bleeding and he'd put his arms out to his sides like he was on the cross, right? And he'd be kneeling there bleeding and they're working on him and he'd actually doing nothing, but then his wrists would start going. And his wrists would start circulating around a little bit. And then his arms would come up a little higher. And then all of a sudden, he'd give a double fucking finger and the place would blow. And then he'd fucking stand up and elbow and start making a fucking comeback. So Hogan could have seen it in Florida with Dusty. But he didn't think of it, Hulk Hogan. He didn't invent it. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't the best one.
The worst one I ever saw, even when I was a kid, I was like, this is ridiculous. He kicked out of everyone's finishers. Randy Savage hits it with the elbow drop at WrestleMania 5. 1, 2, he kicks out. He comes completely back, full energy.
Yeah.
And destroys Randy Savage, which in a lot of ways is very similar to their real-life relationship.
But, you know, that's the thing. I didn't like Hogan's because it just didn't look good. It didn't look legitimate. But again, he was so over. We've talked about this. The more over you are, in some cases, the less good your shit has to look. Steve Austin stomping a mud hole. People couldn't see it because it was Steve Austin. But I just didn't like Hogan's, the poor sucker heel is standing there instead of at least having an opponent in front of you that's reacting to what you're doing like Lawler or like Dusty or like any of those guys. You're just having to follow him around the ring as he does his fucking Hulk up thing and punch him on his left shoulder because he won't turn around and take one. And I'm like, what the fuck? It was odd. It was odd.
Well, Jim, this may be our final question here this week. We'll see how it goes.
We can always hope. We can certainly hope.
It is one that has come in on Twitter and via email from a lot of people. I'm going to entitle it The Birth of the Road Warriors, because it sounds a lot better than What Did Matt Bourne Do? But apparently a lot of people, after hearing you, I think on The Experience, talk a little bit about Matt Borner? No, last week on the drive-thru, Doink the Clown was a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned...
I said if Matt Bourne had kept his dick in his pants, there would have been no Road Warriors.
And people wanted to hear more about that. I guess a lot of people not familiar with that story from early 1983.
I did not know that people were not familiar with that. But basically, Ole Anderson was still running Georgia Championship Wrestling. At that point in time, I believe was that right after, around the same period of time that he was Iggy and Barnett out?
Right after. He Iggy'd out Barnett in Christmas time, 1982. Matt Bourne and Arn Anderson arrive in Georgia, coming out of Mid-South in the spring of 83.
That's right. And Ole was going to make Arn Anderson and Matt Bourne because they had been together in Mid-South, right, as the Rat Pack.
No.
No, they hadn't yet?
No. Well, Matt Bourne was in the Rat Pack with Duggan and DiBiase. Arn was just Marty Lundy working undercard on TV.
So point is, so Matt Bourne is a pretty decent name in wrestling already, and he had been teamed up with DiBiase in the Rat Pack. In Mid-South Wrestling. Of course, Matt Bourne's father, Tough Tony Bourne, was a Portland wrestling legend. And Arn had just became Arn Anderson because he had been Marty Lundy in Mid-South Wrestling. And Ole intended to, using Arn as one of the Anderson family and Matt Bourne, their team, they were going to be the Georgia Tag Team Champions or the National Tag Team Champions, whatever their title was called at that time, and they were going to be pushed as the top heel team. Until Matt Bourne has the cops coming looking for him at TV on charges of, I don't know what the charge was, so I'm not going to slander anybody, but let's just say improper conduct with a female who was not 18 years old of some description is what the bone of contention was. Did I say that in a decent and kind way?
I think so. People could read between the lines.
Or between whatever was spread. But anyway, so immediately, as happened in wrestling in those days when, the pre-internet days and all that shit, when everybody wasn't smart, nobody knew whose real name was what, or how to find people, Matt Bourne left the territory. And fucking poor Arn Anderson... He's sitting there going, it was just why there was heat to the very last between them, because that was going to be Arn's first career break, and he thought he pretty much just got fucked out. He definitely got fucked out of being the top heel team and the tag team champions, and he thought he got fucked out of a career there. Fortunately, he hung around long enough, and it wasn't his fault.
And that's when he went to Southeastern.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, it had just happened because when in the summer of 83, when Dundee and me and the Bobby Fulton, Terry Taylor, all those guys went down to work for Ole in the summer of 83, it had just happened right before we had gotten there, and that's when they had brought the Road Warriors in, because Ole, all of a sudden, that's where the Road Warriors come in. He needs a top heel tag team. He's got nobody... He had plans for these guys. He wasn't going to get rid of them. He's got nobody scheduled to come in. He's got to make up a heel team from somewhere, which is where he went back and visited Eddie Sharkey and brought in the Road Warriors. And so there now Arn is seeing the Road Warriors getting over on national TV, and he's in the first match. Then only lucky they didn't even take the Anderson name away from him. Because when we got closed down, I remember the last night we were in Columbus, Georgia, Arn was on like a preliminary match, and all the rest of us were leaving, but he was still in the territory. They just weren't using him, so they gave him to us instead of putting him on the northern tours. So Dundee had him some way or another run out at the end of the night and just hit whatever he was using as his finish. He just beat up everybody. He just beat up everybody on the card, a big run in, and they all took bumps for him. He said, fuck it. He's the only one staying. We're never coming back. So, But finally, like you said, he got the chance to take the Arn Anderson name and go to Continental shortly afterwards, and he got over. And he was already kind of a natural worker, and people could tell that he had the talent. He just hadn't had the chance to do anything. Now he did, and boom, and by the time that Flair starts going into Continental to work for Ron Fuller, he's seeing this guy on the card, and he's telling Crockett about him. So a year or two later, that's when Arn made the move. But if not for Matt Bourne getting in trouble with underage diddling or whatever, there would have been no Road Warriors. Because nobody was knocking on their door at that time saying, hey, please, guys, come work for me. Remember, they were both out of the business back bouncing in Minneapolis.
Yeah, because Animal had a very brief run where they brought him in as the Road Warrior, all in denim. And then Road Warrior Hawk was wrestling, was it Vancouver? He was doing local stuff
Crusher
there.
Von Haig.
That's right.
Crusher Von Haig. He'd never. Joe had been briefly to Atlanta and worked a couple shots for Crockett just underneath, as you said, as the Road Warrior. And Hawk had gone to Vancouver and said, well, this fucking sucks and I'm making no money, and went back to Minneapolis. I don't know that any other promoter would have even known to ask Eddie Sharkey about him. And they weren't actively at that point in wrestling. It was like, Ole went and said, hey, the big guy, I had before, maybe you got somebody else with him or whatever. Yeah, well, look at this guy. Oh, shit. And they had to kind of be talked into coming back down and doing it, because Joe was telling Mike, I went down there and I made shit, like $200 a week. No, it's going to be different this time.
Yeah, wasn't the story that Rick Rude was actually originally going to be what we would now call Hawk?
I think he may have been a partner, at least, if not Hawk.
Because by the end of 83, all those guys that were training with Eddie Sharkey, the Road Warriors get a push out of the gate and blow up in Georgia, even though Georgia's dying at that time. By the time you get to Mid-South in November, Rick Rude's there working undercard. Crusher Darso is getting a pretty good push, about to get a bigger push as a Russian sympathizer. Nikita shows up the next year. I mean, all those guys really quickly ended up in different places.
And don't forget Hennig. Even though he had an in, he was Larry Hennig's son. He was still from the same social circle. Same
social circle, but not someone with no wrestling background out of Eddie Sharkey's school.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I will concur there. Yeah, Eddie had a nice run for a couple of years there, changed the fucking business. And then by the time the gold mine in Minneapolis had been plumbed by the time they got to Vladimir Pietrov. Old Big Al Blake did not set the world on fire, bless him. The Berserker, John Nord. Yeah, but poor Big Al Blake did not follow in those footsteps.
What'd you think of Rick Rude when you first saw him when you got to Mid-South? Because that would have been the first time you ever saw him anywhere.
Well, he was a nice guy, but he was so green. And I've told this story, but it's been so long. I know we've got some new listeners. I'll tell this one, and then you can play some music, white boy. We first get in the ring with Rude at a house show. And it's an underneath match, and they booked the Midnight Express 3 or 4 weeks around the territory just to get wins and preliminaries. And it was with George Weingroff and Lanny Poffo, and Mike Jackson was at some of the TV matches. And Rick Rude, who was an underneath babyface, that was his first territory. It was still R-O-O-D, his real name, Rick Rude. He was nice enough, but we didn't spend a lot of time around him because the locker rooms were mostly separate. So we never really talked to the baby faces before the matches, but that was not an issue because you got, Dennis is going to be calling it and Bobby's going to be calling what Dennis ain't calling. So it's not like we need to sit down and talk to people except Rick Rude. I'm watching the first time they got in the ring with him, and Dennis locks up with him, and fucking Rude grabs a headlock on Dennis, right? And they start walking. And they're kind of walking in a circle while Rude's got the headlock. They're kind of walking in a circle around the ring. And I can tell Dennis is trying to get something done, but they're just still, and they walk 2 circles around the ring. And finally, Rude, who has just tagged in and got that headlock, tags out to his partner. So after the match, I said, what the fuck was that? Dennis had been trying to call a spot. And of course, we just come from Tennessee, where it's boom, 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 the motion, the action, the whole 9 yards in these kind of spots. But Rude comes from Minneapolis, and he's just got there, and he can't picture these things in his head. Dennis, when he got the headlock on Dennis had turned his back on Bobby, and just called a spot, said, I'll shoot you off and drop down, nail Bobby, get it again. And he starts to shoot him off, and Rude says, whoa, what? And Dennis says, I'll shoot you off and drop down, nail Bobby, get it again. And so now they're walking, right? So Dennis can have more time because Rude says, what? And finally, the way Dennis told it, he said, I said to him, Corny, is what I said to him. I said, I will throw you into the ropes. I will fall down in front of you. Continue moving. Punch Bobby in the face and turn around and get this hold back. And Rude said, I can't get it. And he said, fuck it, tag out. He couldn't picture all he had to do was come off the ropes, jump over Dennis, nail Bobby, turn around, get the headlock again. But he had never done that before. And for whatever reason in his head, he couldn't see it. And if you're in a wrestling match and somebody calls something that you can't see, don't do it, because you're going to fuck it up. And he couldn't see it for whatever. He'd never seen that spot, like the spot that's been done 1 million times. But it was the funniest just to watch Dennis's face when he said, we just left Memphis where they almost let anybody in the door. We come down here to this big territory, and the first spot I call with this fucking guy, he can't hit the ropes and come back. But I've said also, Rick Rude is one of the great success stories, because after that, from those humble beginnings, he got picked by Jarrett in the talent trade, because Jarrett sees this big, great physique, Tom Selleck looking fucking guy. And he heard Rude speak with that tone in his voice, and what a contemptible and obnoxious heel he could be with that kind of voice. So he brings him to Memphis. He puts him in a ring with Lawler, who can have a match with an inanimate object, back before they actually did such a thing. Gave him a valet, changed his name to Rick Rude, R-U-D-E, ravishing Rick Rude. He's got a robe now. And he started learning how to be a top guy. By the time he went from Memphis to Florida, worked for the Florida promotion, and then World Class, and worked for the Von Erichs. And then by the time he shows up for Crockett a couple years later, he's a goddamn top guy with a gimmick and knows how to cut promos and call matches. But 3 years before that, he couldn't hit the ropes and come back.
And with that, we close out this here episode of the Drive Thru. And that is that. Of course. Oh, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Of course.
There's some grumbling there.
Was that what that is? Was that laughter or grumbling?
That's just snickering and grumbling.
What's it labeled as? What is it listed as?
I don't know. I can't see. I don't have my glasses on.
Well, with that, of course, you can join us this Saturday on the Jim Cornette Experience, wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and the Drive Thru right back here next week on Tuesday. You can access classic episodes of the Drive Thru and the Experience by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/Cornette. Only $5 a month gets you access to the archives of the Drive Thru and the Experience from the beginning in late 2013. Right now, we are uploading episodes from the fall of 2016, episodes added each and every week. If you want to hear how we got to this point, go through the archive, patreon.com/Cornette.
If you want to hear how we got to this point, you should hear today's outtakes.
The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette for clips of episodes, full episodes, and omnibus collections, all with the very popular and exclusive Travis Heckel artwork. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. You can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com. Available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com. Closed, but will reopen sometime soon. jimcornette.com. The Drive Thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen at newlawoffice.com.
Not admitted in Nigeria.
But until Saturday on The Experience, and Tuesday right back here on the Drive Thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!